Morning's executive. Do we have any apologies? It was an apology, I know, from Councillor Nicholl. And can I ask the group to take our good wishes? I understand that he's got a family that's quite ill. Yeah.
I had a text from him this morning and he's been at the hospice the last 2.5 days.
Yeah. Can you just please give our thoughts to Malcolm and his family at this difficult time? Malcolm had contacted me last night to say that they've been called for, so obviously it's a really difficult time for him and his priority has to be with his family. Any other apologies? No? Okay. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? And I will apologise now for my voice, and if it goes and I start coughing, I will try and be discreet about it. I do have a dreadful head cold, and I will try not to smitten anybody, honest. Okay, again, if there's no declarations of interest, and I'll thank my colleague for those good wishes, we move to the minute of the executive held on 10th December. Can we accept that as an accurate minute? Agreed. Okay. Thank you. Item 4 is the rolling action log, which appears, everything appears to be up to date. Councillor Reid.
Just a question that relates to the previous minute as well. The consultation on housing allocations, has that commenced?
My understanding is it commenced at the start of the year.
How was it being carried out?
Mr Ritchie, are you able to?
Thanks for we're putting together a programme of consultation. So happy to share that with members on what it is that we're planning to do over the course of the next probably a couple of months or so.
It was delayed so that it would start at in January, in order not to go over the festive period, to give people the maximum opportunity to participate. Okay. We'll move on to item 5, which is a referral from Council, and it's Councillor Kerr's motion in relation to fireworks. Can I invite Councillor Kerr to come forward and speak to his motion?
Thank you, Convener. Convener, I bring this motion to you as a consequence of an email I received from a constituent, and I'm sure other elected members might have had or received the same email. The email was supported by the RSPCA, giving us stats regarding fireworks. I found myself in a difficult situation as I have 3 grandchildren, 2 of which have enjoyment from the fireworks regarding the colour and the noise. However, I've got another part of my family, my wee dog, who I've had for 13 years, a wee Lhasa Lapso, called Bex, and he is part of my family. For a full week leading up to the 5th of November, it's absolutely horrendous for my wee dog. And it happens every year at this time, and also happens at New Year. There are communities who have their own fireworks display. Recently, one of my own communities, Avon Bridge, had their own, but they made it very clear to everyone when they were having it, and this allowed the residents in the area to calm their pets down. It doesn't make any better regarding the noise, but if the families know exactly when they're going to happen, it gives them an opportunity to calm their pets down. And this doesn't affect dogs, it affects cats, birds, rabbits, everything. And I've been speaking to some local farmers from Upper Braes who also says it affects their livestock as well. This also affects vulnerable children and adults, not just pets. We also, the noise and the lights really affect them. And after speaking to some families that are affected by these issues, they wish it just didn't happen at all. But unfortunately, that's the way it is, and we didn't want to spoil everybody's fun. And having seen some horrific photos of pets being injured by fireworks, we all understand the amount of fun and joy that these displays have. But these pets and vulnerable adults and children have the right to a quieter fireworks display. It is therefore I submit this motion, convener, to the council. That's a 1, 2, 3 and 4.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Now I hear from Councillor Murtagh, who is the portfolio holder for public protection. Laura?
Thanks, convener. I know we're all having some technical issues this morning, so forgive me if this is slightly more disjointed than I would like as I flick between different devices. I think I would completely agree and recognise the sentiment and regard that Councillor Kerr has expressed both in his motion and in his words here today. I think this is an issue which we've all come across in our communities, and indeed nationally that is reflected up and down the country and has been for some time. Obviously our parliamentarians regularly get correspondence on this too, and in light of this, recently, last year from February to May, the Scottish Government ran a consultation which was entitled Consultation on Fireworks in Scotland, Your Experiences, Your Ideas and Your Views, which had a really excellent level of public engagement. There was more than 16,500 responses to that consultation, and it included a number of public events and importantly was overseen by an external advisory group that included COSLA, included the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, the Ambulance Service, Trading Standards and the Scottish Community Safety Network, as well as the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Following on from that, there was an analysis of the responses, and I would completely agree that what's borne out from that is a significant concern from our communities about the impact that fireworks has on individuals, particularly individuals who are vulnerable, be that young people, veterans, those with assistance dogs or other animals. And I think that it's very important that the views of our vulnerable communities are particularly taken into account and balanced against the enjoyment that many get ahead of fireworks displays. I think what's important also to note is that firework displays in themselves play a very important role in public safety in terms of the encouragement, and we've seen this very much in recent years, movement towards organised displays being the norm and discouragement from the kind of traditional local bonfires, and that that has been borne out very much by moves not just from our politicians but from our fire and rescue service, who are very well respected by our communities. But I would indeed agree that the findings of the consultation do back up that, and it summaриses that almost all who responded to consultation, 94%, said they would welcome increased controls on the sale of fireworks. And that's borne out by other public opinion surveys. So I think what's very important is that on the back of that report, the Scottish Government has set a number of actions, and that some came into immediate effect to do with last year's fireworks event, and one of those was that not so much the government but the police, as this is a kind of multi-agency approach, took on to compile lists of local displays and advertise that. And that meant a consistent national messaging could go out, which wasn't confusing to members of the public, as sometimes if you're getting mixed messages from government, police, local councils, that can be very unhelpful to members of the public who maybe don't understand the different distinctions. And I was very encouraged by the kind of interim results of that last year in that high-profile campaign, which kicked off immediately following those recommendations. But there are a number of other recommendations from that report, and one of them is that there's been a fireworks review group set up to look at this, and it will look at all aspects of how fireworks can be enjoyed safely and with respect to our vulnerable members of the community. That group set up by government is due to report by the summer, and it will look obviously at legislative approaches as well. At the moment, this legislation is reserved to Westminster, and although current government have not been in very long, the previous government indicated that they had no wish to, despite public petitions, to really be looking at this and changing. And there has been significant correspondence, I believe, between governments about this. So the legislation will be getting looked at and what can be done. I believe that my colleagues may present an amendment this morning which refers to some of these points, but and I don't wish to disagree with Councillor Kerrin's motivation, but I think what's really important and what we've seen from resilience events in particular and public messaging across the country is how important one consistent message is on public safety issues coming from all our agencies together, and that perhaps our resources at Council, and we don't have all the detail behind these 16,500 responses, nor do we have the resources and understanding and input of the Community Safety Group, COSLA, training standards all coming together. And that I feel that body, which has been very proactively set up by government, should be allowed to continue and make its recommendations in order that we can all look at that and take that messaging forward to have something really meaningful and constructive. And I would be more in favour of that. I think that there are already measures that are being undertaken, and I pay tribute to the excellent work that our emergency services do to get those messages out. But I think that perhaps this is premature in perhaps muddying the water and allowing for a bit of pause and finding what the report is going to say. Sorry, is everybody hearing that? Is it just me? Just me. Would be the more prudent approach, and I would commend that approach to our colleagues to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. We can all hear that. Yeah. Can we maybe just switch up? Oh, it's coming back on again. Okay, I think that's okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Garner because there's an amendment first, and that may allow a more informed debate. Yeah. Okay. We need. Sorry, apologies. We need somebody to move Councillor Kerr's motion. I keep forgetting because they're not members of the committee. Formally movement. Right. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener. And I think the vast majority of the points have been covered very well by both Laura and James. As Laura mentioned, we do have an amendment. The amendment which has been passed round, I think. If not, Jack's not there. The amendments, Jack's got them there.
I think
the amendments. The word number. So, executive notes, significant public concern related to the sale and use of fireworks and the impact their noise can have, in particular on vulnerable individuals, those with mental health concerns, veterans, domestic pets, guide, assistance dogs and wild animals. The proactive and positive actions of the Scottish Government in undertaking a comprehensive public consultation in 2019, resulting in the Fireworks Action Plan, promoting the safe and appropriate use of fireworks in Scotland. The summary of actions published in the above report, including an awareness-raising campaign already undertaken in October-November 19, medium-term actions relating to coming year's events, and the establishment of a firework review group due to report to the Government by summer of 2020. The positive experience many in our communities have in coming together to experience firework displays, and the positive effect such events have on levels of public safety and in reducing antisocial behaviour. The important role our fire and rescue services and other emergency services play in keeping the public safe surrounding the traditional fireworks period. Executive resolves to give every assistance to the Scottish Government's Firework Review Group and continue to input through community safety and local government forums as appropriate. to instruct officers to produce a report following the publication of the Scottish Government's Firework Review Group recommendations, highlighting any measures which can be taken specifically within the competence of local government. And finally, to express our continued thanks and appreciation to our emergency services for the vital role they play in keeping the public safe regarding the use of fireworks.
Thank you. I think we've now got copies which will circulate. In that time while it's being circulated, do we have a formal seconder for Councillor Kerr's motion?
Convener, I'm happy to second Councillor Kerr's motion.
Okay.
I do have some concerns about how this would be enforced without legislation, but maybe officers can clarify that for us.
Maybe give people a minute or two just to look over the amendment before we move in proper. And can I just for the process, can I have a formal seconder for Councillor Garner's amendment?
Yes, Convener, I'll formally.
Okay, thank you.
Convener, I think Councillor Nimmo was asking a question there about enforcement, and I think Councillor Kerr's motion doesn't particularly require any particular enforcement. It's calling on the government particularly to introduce some legislation in relation to the noise, in relation to fireworks, and I think, as Councillor Murtagh correctly observed, the sale of fireworks is a matter that's reserved to the UK government. However, the actual use of fireworks within the community is something which the Scottish Government can have some influence on, and the particular issue which Councillor Kerr raises around notification of displays is something which she asks the Council to consider, and it is within your current resolution under the Civic Government Scotland Act that public firework displays require a public entertainment licence. So I think the practical issue which Councillor Kerr raises is to consider whether there should be a standard condition on those to inform the community that such displays are taking place. And I think, as I understand it, in any event, the main display, which is organised by the Community Trust, I think they do that ordinarily in any event. So those are the principal issues, I think, in relation to enforcement which arise from the terms of the motion itself.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo, does that clarify things for you? Yeah. Okay, I will open it up to any member. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, Convener. Can I ask if this would involve establishment of any bylaws? Yes, I was asking if there was any requirement for a bylaw or bylaws in relation to the motion.
No.
It appears at first sight there's not much difference between the motion and the amendment in terms of the aims and objectives. Not for the first time. I wonder why the two parties don't get together before the meeting and sort out the wording, because I don't see much difference between what one is a wish and the other one is what's happening at the moment. If it is in accord with the wish, I just leave it at that. I wondered if either party was willing to accept the other.
I think that as Councillor Reid has just said, that there is an element or a large element of agreement in this. The big issues are not the formal displays. The big issues, and I have a collie dog, so I know only too well, are those periods in front of bonfire night and even several days afterwards, where people let off very loud bangers because that's all they are. And there appears to be no legislation which covers that, and if we had something that worked just in terms of that overall period, I'm quite happy with Bonfire Night and to a degree New Year's Eve, but it's the extension of that that is causing the real challenge. You can prepare for a known night, but other than that, it's a real challenge, and I think that's the bit that needs to be addressed.
I would agree. Unfortunately, we don't have the legislation to do that at this stage, and that's where the difficulty is. But the consultation that has been carried out sends a very clear message, and I think with the overlay of climate change, I think that there is a real impetus to look to change all of that. But it is going to take a concerted effort to be able to take that to the legislators to say that there is this demand. I fully appreciate and understand from my own experience of my dog who had a dreadful time during the period of the fireworks. He was fine until he could see them, but once the noise and the sight upset him considerably. So I think that there has to be something there, but I don't think we're quite there at the stage where we can actually say this is what Scottish Government can do, but this is what we need the legislator to do or give us powers in order to be able to make that change. Councillor Alexander, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, the advantage is, Convener, with the amendment is that the work has effectively been done for us, and it's been done on a scale that we can't compete with. So I think that we all have concerns in this particular area. The concerns have been picked up by the government, and the matter has been acted upon at this point in time. We need to have a consultation. We need to have the individuals and organisations that have a tie-in with fireworks displays, whether it be as sales, whether it be the actual displays themselves. And we need to have everyone's voice and everyone's opinions listened to. And my fear is that with the motion, it is slightly one-sided in terms of its subjectivity, whereas the amendment gives us the opportunity to feed into the process as a local authority and to have that consultation extended beyond its current role, and certainly within the role within the motion that we have today. There's also an issue of additional resources, and if there are implications for resources being implemented by Falkirk Council or being supplied by Falkirk Council, then we will have the opportunity to make claim against the government for those. So while I don't anticipate there will be a huge amount, every penny counts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. Can I first of all thank James and Laura for their contributions? I thought they were absolutely superb. One of the big things I picked up, sorry, in particular what Laura had said, about consistency of message. And I think what the amendment's doing is asking us to wait till the consultation is done, so that you have a consistent message throughout Scotland. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing. I think we're, as has been said by particularly Lynn, I think, and Pat, I think the message we're probably basically in agreement on this. The only thing is I do agree that if we all go off and we're all doing separate and different things, I think it's much better that we have the one message going out that gets out. It'll go out. I'm sure it'll be on the government will put out messages come close to fireworks nights and things like that. I think it's only sensible to wait till that consultation is completed and the recommendations come back from, which I understand is only April, so it's not that far away.
Yeah. I'm going to make a suggestion here, because I take on board what your members are saying, that there's a lot of similarities. and I do wonder if there is potential to take some positive action from the point of view of Falkirk Council, is by taking the content of Councillor Murtaugh's amendment that moved by Councillor Garner, but adding in some of the practical aspects from Councillor Kerr in relation to writing to the government and to looking at what we can do through our own licensing. And I'm just going to put that out there for members to give some consideration to. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, and I think that's pretty sensible. And just something there that I picked up there, the consultation had received 16,420 replies, and 7,000 of them replies were in the first 24 hours. It's a massive consultation. Everything's covered in it. So I think that's a big part of the amendment that we need to have in there. So yeah, but I do agree with the line you're taking.
I would go to Councillor Kerr and Councillor Murtaugh for their comment in relation to my suggestion.
Convener, I'm just wanting to be better, eh? And if it means the two of them, a bit of the two of them, I'm quite happy with that, eh? It's not about us and them, it's about getting it right for the families who have got pets, the families who have got vulnerable adults and children, and it's about helping them as a community of Falkirk. And if it means adding a bit of mine and a bit of Laura's, I'm happy with that, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kerr, Councillor Murtaugh.
I agree that it's very helpful that we all come out here speaking with one voice on issues particularly to do with public safety, and I would be happy to, as you say, Convener, accept the measure about the licensing conditions for displays, although I do agree it's not so much those displays that are the issue, but it is any little that's helpful. But I do think, as Councillor Garner and Alexander said, that the important thing is that we take as much opportunity to have the expertise that we're put through the consultation recommendations heard, and make sure it's consistent messaging. So if Councillor Kerr is happy with that, I'm certainly happy to adopt that part of the motion, and indeed formally write to government. I've already met, just as I've already met with some of the representatives of Community Safety Scotland in December through COSLA meetings to have informal discussions, because it is obviously a known issue, and would continue to do that and on formal levels as well.
Okay, I would turn to members now to get their views. Would they be happy to accept that?
I'm quite happy to support what Councillor Kerr's just said, but I would like to know when this is actually going to come back. Are we going to get a report back to the executive once the letter's been issued?
Well, certainly we can arrange for the letter to be circulated to members of the executive, and indeed it would obviously be taken forward through the work of the licensing section. Mr Moody?
Yes, that would certainly be true, and I think if the executive is adopting in particular number 2 of Councillor Garner's amendment, which is instructing officers to produce a report following the end of the work of the firework group that the Scottish Government has established, there would certainly be a report back here following that. And as I understand it, the committee is also content to adopt from Councillor Kerr's original motion the 2 practical suggestions, which were the licensing one and the writing to the government. So that's effectively the composite that's being agreed today. So 2 from Councillor Kerr's, and then the 3 practical ones from Councillor Garner's amendment. So yes, there would be a report back following that.
Okay, everyone agreed? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. We move into our substantive business, and the first item is climate change and future actions, and I think it's Robin Millard.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, councillors. This report gives an update as requested by the Executive from its meeting of 27th August on current and proposed future actions to address the Council's climate emergency declaration. The report itself has a number of different areas, and I'll go through those briefly, if you don't mind, as I come through. In terms of background to this, you'll be aware that the Scottish Government's Climate Change Bill was passed in September last year, and set some fairly ambitious targets countrywide and also on local authorities to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. The Council themselves have taken a step further than that and declared a net zero target date of 2030. And this report gives some background on the challenges that are going to be presented by that. In addition, the Climate Change Bill also strengthened the likely requirements on local authorities to report on their progress in relation to climate change duties. At the moment, the Council reports its obligations in its yearly statutory return public bodies duties report, and that's shown at Appendix 1 of the report. However, in light of the climate emergency declared by the Scottish Government, it's likely that the requirements for reporting on local authorities will be changed, with the impact that from 2022 onwards, there will be an obligation to state the year in which the Council considers that it can achieve any zero greenhouse gases or by reducing their direct emissions, I should say, in relation to greenhouse gases, and also their targets for reducing indirect emissions within their area. And the authority will also be obliged to report on how it's going to match its spending aspirations and plans to meet those targets. There will also be an obligation for the Council to make its report available in a publicly visible format, as well as to Scottish Government. You may note from the Appendix 1 that the report in its current form is not a particularly easy read. In terms of the Council's own carbon footprint, this is illustrated at section 3.2 and is an accompanying part of the public body's duty report. The Council's Energy and Climate Change team produce a comprehensive report on the Council's carbon impact as a part of this report, and it also identifies its top 10 energy consuming buildings as part of that reporting purpose. This is circulated and reported and reviewed to the Corporate Sustainability Working Group. For the 2018-19 reporting year, the Council's carbon footprint totalled just under 49 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. That's kilotons CO2e, if anybody wants to understand the acronym that's in there. This was 2% higher than the previous year's figure, 1% less than the 2013-14 baseline year that we're using for that. I'll go on further to describe the reasons for that apparent increase. Decreases in electricity consumption through energy efficiency and business mileage have unfortunately been offset by the increase in waste emissions. This comes from a combination of factors of the way carbon emissions are reported for waste, both in terms of landfill waste and recycle it. Section 4 considers how our current actions are progressing in relation to reduction of emissions across the Council's business. The Council's Energy and Climate Change team monitor all projects across all Council areas of business in relation to their emissions reduction, and they capture those as part of a carbon project register. As such, the Energy and Climate Change team work very closely with all services across the Council, and they have identified projects, more than 90, which are expected to save a total of 13,000 tonnes of CO2 by 2022-23. In 2018-19 alone, just over 1,200 tonnes of CO2 were saved thanks to 20 projects that were taken forward. A list of those projects are detailed at Appendix 3. The Council is also currently involved in a pilot project for a local heat and energy efficiency strategy. This is a pilot that's funded by Scottish Government, and it determines the capability for the Council to reduce the carbon impact of its built estate across 2 trial areas at the moment, and the 2 trial areas considered are Grangemouth and Falkirk Town Centre. It aims to assess the current status of our building stock and the emission reduction strategies and targets that could be achieved, modelled under a number of different scenarios, including that of the aspiration that the Council has set as part of its zero emissions target, as well as matching to more the defined national targets in terms of zero emissions. The Council is also actively involved in a project called the Northern Connections Interreg project. This is a European project where Falkirk Council, along with Scottish Enterprise, have partnered with 20 other European partners to deliver energy efficiency and technological solutions which start to target carbon reduction through innovation. Carbon capture, carbon storage and use are some of those innovations. This project work will be focused on something called a living lab, focused in the Grangemouth area, and includes discussion with local industry partners. Currently, this work ties into a number of other large-scale projects, including the Falkirk and Grangemouth Investment Zone. In addition to the carbon reduction measures coming from buildings and other initiatives, the Council is also active in terms of biodiversity. Biodiversity is considered a significant contributor to carbon storage, if I can call it that. Peatlands and forest restoration, which are captured by the Council's Biodiversity Action Plan, are key factors in terms of carbon offsetting, as it might be considered. Now, to reflect the scale of the change required to fulfil the Council's statutory obligations, sustainability and climate change has been raised from medium to high risk within the Council's corporate risk register. To tackle the targets that have been set, it's proposed that there should be significant emission reduction targets set across the Council areas. And first and foremost, it's important to understand that or define the scope of what that zero emissions target, as was set by the Council, should be. The Council's own direct operations, the current carbon footprint calculation that you see in the appendices, only represents about 2% of the Council's total estimated emissions. Now, due to the data limitations, the Council is unable to monitor and establish robust targets for emissions council-wide that it doesn't have full control of. It's therefore recommended that the Council's direct activities form the basis of the target zero emission scope, while still obviously focusing on wider discussion with community partners, industry partners across the whole area. In relation to that, a modelling exercise was conducted and has shown that for the Council to achieve net zero emissions by 2030 in its own direct emissions areas, then there are a number of actions that would need to be taken forward. Firstly, ambitious carbon sequestration projects should be implemented beyond those that are in the current biodiversity plan. And radical targets, reduction targets, would be needed in several sectors, as are noted in Table 1 of Section 4.2 of the report. Now, broadly going across those areas, that would mean an 86% reduction in building gas usage, 61% reduction in building electricity emissions-related factors, building oil, vehicle fuel, business mileage going down by similar percentages, reductions in water consumption. Electricity transmission losses are related to the way that emissions calculations come from electricity factors, so not something that we can directly impact other than through reduction in electricity use. Reduction in street lighting emissions of 85% and reductions in waste of 70%. This would mean that in the course of the 10 years between now and 2030, the Council would be required to drastically reduce business mileage, building gas consumption, and decarbonise its fleet activities, along with a very significant drop in waste produced by both the Council and from household activities. Recycling and composting, although they produce emissions, produce significantly less emissions targets than landfill. So a significant factor in waste reduction would be the move away from landfill. Although they're ambitious, these targets are achievable, but they do require adequate resourcing to achieve those. In terms of buildings, significant emissions reductions can be achieved through implementing energy efficiency measures, such as LED lighting, improvements in the building controls, improvements in the building fabric to increase its thermal efficiency, and the implementation of low-carbon heat solutions. Now, those that are considered low-carbon heat solutions are electrically driven heating systems, heat pumps, biomass solutions, and the potential for hydrogen as a fuel, as an alternative to natural gas. Hydrogen is some way off in terms of its ability to be available, certainly in the short term. The planned restoration, as noted earlier, of the peatlands and the forest estate plan would in themselves not be enough to offset our further remaining emissions. despite all the energy efficiency reductions that could be achieved in buildings, there will still be a notional carbon footprint that the council would have. Therefore, offsetting in relation to biodiversity is considered a key strand of any zero carbon aspiration. And due to the significance of the potential to increase this offset requirement, the council will look to engage the Central Scotland's Green Network Trust in assisting us to study and identify the capability within council-owned land to increase the carbon offset capability of biodiversity options, including the potential to study what opportunities exist to increase the number of green roofs on council assets. In terms of recommended immediate actions, the actions that are outlined in this report will require the council to consider budget provision to ensure that these actions are embedded within project delivery going forward. And as noted, there are some examples: carbon sequestration, the retrofitting of buildings and infrastructure, and the decarbonisation of the council's fleet that would be key target points within the future actions. This level of investment is likely to be significant, and the first estimate of capital cost coming from the pilot LHEAS study, which studies the council's buildings in terms of efficiency and zero carbon or low carbon technologies. When that's extrapolated across the full council area, it suggests that costs in the region of 165 million over a 10-year period would be required to augment the council's buildings to achieve the target reduction. Table 2 of section 4.3 also gives a list of further considerations for action which the council could take forward, and these are in line with proposals that have been highlighted by other entities, other partners who have stated climate emergency responses and some of the actions they are going to consider taking. As noted earlier in the report, buildings could benefit from the efficiency improvements and low carbon solutions that will be suggested in the LHEAS pilot study. Any new buildings should be considered for embedding zero carbon design principles as part of their either procurement or construction. And also that the council needs to reinforce and consider rationalising, reducing its built estate in line with the recommendations that have already been established in the strategic property review. In terms of land use, it would be the consideration to significantly accelerating tree planting, peatland restoration projects and any other biodiversity projects that would contribute to carbon offsetting. The council should consider the purchase of 100% renewable energy for the council estate. There is an opportunity to do that within the national power contract that the council is currently a signatory to. The council should consider that all newly procured vehicles be electric. Should also explore the potential for hydrogen-fueled transport options where electric vehicle options are not an option. They should consider a requirement for taxis to be electric vehicles through licensing, although that wouldn't impact on the council's direct emissions. It would be part of a wider consideration as part of community zero carbon aspiration. The council may want to consider the introduction of the workplace parking levy as a way to discourage car use and to potentially raise money for low carbon transport initiatives. The council should also explore low carbon public transport opportunities where those might exist. In terms of business travel, explore and develop the potential for employees to work remotely from work. There's already initiatives in place across the council to do that, but those should be amplified to try and minimise business mileage. The council should consider requirements for employees travelling by train instead of flying when it takes less than 5 hours. That may not be a particularly big impact on the carbon footprint, but it does send out a message about behavioural change. In terms of procurement, there should be a sustainability test embedded in all tenders to ensure that appropriate carbon reduction targets are incorporated and embedded into any tender and procurement opportunities. In terms of waste, consider how to support residents, businesses to access and increase recycling rates and reuse of existing materials where possible. Recycling and reuse obviously reduces the need to promote materials to landfill. Landfill being by far the highest contributor to carbon emissions. Food, the Council should explore the potential to purchase organic vegetarian foods, to consider meat-free days in terms of its own options as a means of low carbon initiatives. Should consider making space for food growing a requirement of any new housing developments. In terms of investment, the Council should consider how and when it can influence decisions relating to investment to support low carbon projects instead of those that rely on fossil fuel solutions. We're mindful, obviously, that the pension fund is active in this area already, but it should be a further consideration for the Council. And really, as an end point, the Council should consider how all policy, strategic and budget decisions and subsequent action plans are aligned to move to a commitment to the net zero emissions by 2030. As a last point on that table, there should be consideration to a training programme for both elected members and senior officers with the aim of becoming climate leaders and champions and generating a better understanding of the climate challenge that faces us. Section 4.4 of the report covers specific comment on the ambition for Grangemouth to be a zero carbon town by 2030. It should be understood that in relation to the earlier point that I made, that the Council's direct emissions account for only some 2% of the area's entire emissions. Now, according to the UK Local Authority and Regional Carbon Dioxide Emissions Statistics from for a period 2005 to 2017, Grangemouth, you will be aware, is home to some of the country's highest emitting industries. The Council, however, doesn't have any direct control over the emissions from these industries, but we do have a role to explore partnership working in relation to working with industry, such as the Interreg project that was mentioned earlier on. And that will have a key role in generating what carbon reduction measures can come from industry. However, it should be acknowledged that the Council does not have direct control over the delivery timescale and the ultimate success of the delivery of these technologies. In relation to consultation, section 5 of the report, it's proposed that the Energy and Climate Change team will discuss the potential target areas with each council service area to consider how these carbon reduction targets can be implemented across the relevant service areas. Now, you may see from the carbon footprint report, which has an illustrative carbon emission footprint for each service area of the council, the service reduction, the carbon reduction demands will be different per service area depending on the impact of the individual services. For instance, within areas where there's higher fleet and transport use, such as development services, there's going to be a higher impact on service reduction from fleet and business mileage reduction. So each service area will be consulted directly by the Energy and Climate Change team to have a more targeted discussion on the service specific demands for target reduction. Section 6 of the report covers the implications of this in terms of financial challenges. These will be significant, as has been highlighted earlier. In terms of the carbon reduction requirement for councils' buildings, this is stated earlier in the report. There will need to be similar considerations given to any costs aligned with fleet and transport opportunities, and also opportunities for increasing the carbon offset to be delivered by biodiversity projects. Whilst there are funding opportunities which can be available to the Council from government and other sources, such as Energy Efficient Scotland, the LCITP funds, SEEP, SALEX, sorry for all the acronyms, but there are a number of government-funded opportunities which will give either grant or loan assistance to low-carbon initiatives. The extent and level to which these will remain or extend in the future is not yet clear and will probably become more apparent over the course of 2020. In terms of resources, there are no immediate resources arising from this stage of the work that's been done. However, the executive approval of wider council and service area targets will generate the need for clear governance and budget support to deliver the aspirations that are set out in those target levels. From a legal perspective, the Council's failure to report its progress against targets that it sets within both our current and future public bodies reporting obligations could result in, at the very least, severe reputational damage. In light of the climate emergency declared by the Scottish Government, there will be increasing pressure on public bodies such as ourselves, and we would expect from reporting regimes made more readily available to the public in the future, there would be increased scrutiny over our ability to meet our stated targets. From a risk perspective, until the emissions reduction targets are fully embedded within the Council's organisational governance and service delivery structures, the risk of failing to comply with our climate obligations remains high. And the failure to reduce our carbon emissions will exacerbate our risk of failure to deliver service provisions due to the more severe consequences generally of climate change. Severe weather events, heat waves, biodiversity loss, sea level rise are all aspects of climate change that we should be aware of. In terms of equalities, there's an element of climate justice that's embedded in every climate change decision that's made, and that's about ensuring that those who are most affected by climate change are afforded the highest level of protection. Now, it's considered that that should be embedded as part of any climate change consideration on the part of the Council's business. From a sustainability and environmental impact, the ambitious nature of the Council's stated zero carbon target in itself will ensure that sustainability and environmental considerations should be embedded through the outcomes and decisions that the Council makes. In conclusion, Council's climate emergency declaration and net zero target timescale is enormously challenging, and it will require decision making that prioritises and adequately resources the delivery of Council services that act to minimise the impact on our environment. The timescale to deliver the change is such that action is required immediately to progress those changes, appropriate to the scale of the challenge that's been presented. The embedding of service, climate change and risk targets and the successful delivery of the projects and initiatives to support these will rely on robust governance and support from all parts of the organisation. And further, will require the Council to identify and secure the support from external sources, resources to ensure that the challenges, opportunities and risks presented in the report can be addressed. If I revert back now to the recommendations from the report, it is that the Executive is requested to note the progress that's currently underway to reduce the Council's greenhouse gas emissions, to endorse the ambitious emission reduction targets set in section 4.2, which are going to be required if the Council is to approach the achievement of net zero emissions by 2030, to note the considerations set in section 4.3, which will contribute to the Council's approach to addressing the climate emergency, to note the potential scale of capital investment required to enable carbon reduction measures, the examples being given in the area of retrofitting of existing buildings and infrastructure, and to endorse the targets that will be reviewed by each service area to ensure that there's a one Council approach to carbon reduction. To note that carbon sequestration is essential to offset the remaining emissions that will remain even after the efficiency initiatives have been implemented, and to recognise that the current level of tree planting and peatland restoration will need to be significantly intensified if the substantial resource and carbon offset requirements are going to be met. Endorse that the climate change emergency declaration calls for a cohesive organisational approach, prioritising how we budget, work, travel and deliver services to minimise their impact on the environment. And finally, note that by taking the above actions and ensuring that emissions reduction targets are fully embedded within the Council's governance and service delivery, the Council will be taking the actions to limit the consequences of climate change with the corresponding wider benefits to the community that will bring. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, for that, Robin. I'm going to go to the portfolio holder first, and we'll hear from Paul first.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to Robin and his excellent team for putting their support together and the work they've already done and the work they're going to be undertaking in the near future. The Climate Emergency Declaration was the first step. Now it's time for action. It will be essential to draw a climate action plan showing the pathway to net zero. My idea is to establish a cross-party climate emergency working group to oversee this plan. This group will be made up of elected officers, elected members, officers and indeed high school pupils, as it's their future we are dealing with too. The executive report includes a list of 10 suggestions for immediate action that would show that the Council takes the climate crisis seriously. They are based on what the science says and exchanges with the CSWG. There are only suggestions at this stage. There will need to be a deeper work to allocate resources and make the business case for them. Our excellent officers have been working on this for some time and have a lot of background information for each one of the recommendations. This is a great place to start. Claire Marion, one of the team, Energy and Climate Change Officer, has also created a database of the variety of immediate measures that have been put forward by other councils to give us more ideas if we need to select other recommendations than those suggested. This gives us the perfect platform to start from and arrange a workshop with specialist officers and members to prioritise them. Once we have had our initial working group meeting and have agreed some direction, it is my hope to hold an all-member seminar explaining where we are and indeed our direction of travel towards a net carbon future. I think Robin touched on one point there which I think is extremely important. I think that's of education and training of members on this subject. I think it's really important that we all get a grasp on this because the decisions we're going to be making are extremely large for the future. With this in mind, I have a motion which I'm hoping Jack has managed to get printed off with some IT difficulties. I'll just read it out as he's handing it out again.
Thank you.
The Climate Change Action Stakeholder Group motion. I move that the Executive agrees recommendations 1 to 8, as highlighted by Robin, contained within the report, and the additional clause below. Clause 9, it would be to establish a Climate Change Action Stakeholder Working Group with the following terms of reference. Climate Change Action Stakeholder Working Group, terms of reference. The remit of the group will be the Climate Change Action Stakeholder Working Group will prioritise the actions to be taken by the Council and produce an action plan to be considered by the Executive in response to the Climate Emergency Declaration with the aim to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. The membership. The Climate Change Action Stakeholder Working Group shall comprise of 6 elected members, 2 drawn from each political group represented on the Council, and high school pupils, with 1 drawn from each of the high schools in the Council area. The Environment Portfolio Holder will chair the group. The group will be supported in its work by professional advisors, but these officers will not be members of the group. Such officers will attend as deemed appropriate by the Chief Executive and/or relevant director. This members' working group has been taken forward by a few councils already. I think it's 4 in total now, and the feedback I'm getting from them is excellent. They believe it's the correct way to go, and certainly gives a direction for where we should be going. So yes, happy with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. I'd first of all just like to extend our sympathies to the people in Australia who are actually suffering through this climate change at the minute with the fires, and people have lost their lives and many animals have lost their lives, and it's a very difficult, very difficult time for them, and so I'd just like to convey our sympathies to them and the brave firefighters who are putting their life on the line. I'd like to thank Robin for that very concise report, and I think there's him and his team have put an awful lot of work into it. And this is of such significance, it's basically affecting everybody on the planet. And I think that it is of such significance and there's so much in it that I would prefer that this was moved and taken. I'm going to move that this is taken to the full council for a full debate by all members, since it is of such significance. Thank you.
My thoughts on that is this is the main policy making body, and if there was a division, then perhaps I could see the point of taking it to council for further debate. I think there'd be far more opportunities for members to input and have influence through the working group and the all members seminar. It gives me a hesitancy in whether or not we're actually all on the same page. At times of crisis, climate emergencies is one of those crises, then the public sector needs to be leading by example. I think this report clearly indicates that Falkirk Council wants to be leading by example and to have influence over others. So I'm hesitant to agree to full council at this stage, but I'm happy to hear from other members. In fact, maybe Mr Moody, do you want to make comment with regard to where the decision should be taken in relation to this?
Convener, you've referred to the fact that the executive is the main policy decision-making body in the standing orders, and that's correct. It's also open to the executive to refer to council. That's certainly a power that the executive has. So it's primarily, I think, a matter for the members of the executive to determine what the appropriate decision-making body is. But you are correct that the starting point is that the executive is the principal policy decision maker.
Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Convener. I'd just like to second Councillor Bissett. There's 30 members, elected members, sit on this council. There's only 12 in this committee. This issue, climate change, affects everybody, and I think all elected members should have some sort of input into this. I've just read through the motion. Now, bearing in mind there's 12 elected members sitting on this committee, there's only 6 elected members going to be on this working group, and that's even worse. This should go to full council.
I'm not sure how you would have a working group of full council that would actually be able to have... Well, that was what you inferred, Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Reid.
Yes, I do understand your hesitancy. I used to be in that position myself sometimes in the chair, but bearing in mind that the next council meeting is next week, and I think it's still feasible to include this item at this stage, I don't think it would upset standing orders.
And my understanding is...
It's a different scenario if there's a council meeting next week, it seems...
But my understanding is next week's full council is directly related to budget decisions, and it would probably have to go to the March meeting.
Stick another item on there.
I'm happy to take your view on that, Mr Moody, but that was my understanding. It was specifically to deal with the Housing Capital Programme items.
I think there are going to be a couple of other items on it too. There's a Treasury management report, I think, referred, and I think there's also something to do with the town centre. There was, I think, a decision at the October special meeting to call for a report on special measures to be taken to support the town centre, pending the whole issue of procurement of the HQ. So it's not going to be a wholly budget-related matter. So I think there would be scope for adding it to that meeting were the decision to be to refer today.
So again, although I would normally be hesitant, I don't see a problem with the fact that council's next week, Jim.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. I think this is a comprehensive, detailed report, and thank you. And I think the key element is that only 2% of our local emissions are from us, and the majority are coming from major industry. But the actions that are require a whole change in mindset, not just for council, but for our communities and for every one of us over a very short period of time. And in the spirit of your earlier suggestions regarding the fireworks, I believe that this particular motion brought forward actually seeks to include everybody in terms of workshop and engagement, and we should be welcoming it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. You're absolutely right, and as I said, it's up to the public sector to lead in that change and going forward. While we may only be representative of 2% of the emissions, we can have a great influence elsewhere, and particularly within industry. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I don't know if we remember the old saying that a camel is a horse built by committee. The thought of 30 elected members in a working group it fills me with absolute dread. The bottom line is there is nothing in this report that has been highlighted by any member of the opposition as being detrimental to the objective that we have. Instead, you know, we've got another delay, another opportunity to push into the long grass. Probably the most important issue that we as an authority will face. Now, I can understand if there was areas that the opposition were unhappy with, in which case, let's hear them. Let's hear from the members of the Labour and Conservative groups, who again seem to be acting in unison. Let's hear what's wrong with this report, what proposals are contained within the recommendations they disagree with, and why we want to see an extension to a structure that I think is unworkable. The bottom line is every single report in this agenda today has an impact on all 30 members. We know that. It's meant to be like that, because it's what we have is a structure in place that allows for representation. Now, I'd have seen the point again if we had said that the working group was to be members of one party only. We haven't said that. We've been inclusive throughout with this issue and other issues that are major to the authority. But we do need a smaller working group picking up on the detail and reporting back. And the report allows for reports back at a later date in terms of how we're progressing with each of these issues. There's certainly an opportunity at that point or before for members who are unhappy with the progress or lack of progress being made to chip up and to make their points known. What message does it send out to the general public when we see yet another delay, another report we can't agree, despite the fact that the structure we have in place at the moment with the executive and the full council was put together by members of the opposition when in power. And I just do not understand why what was so good then is so bad now, particularly when we have an opportunity to dig deep into this particular issue and bring forward a set of proposals that build on what we have at the moment. And it's that ability to build that we need to properly address. And there's nothing that has come forward from the opposition this morning that tells me that they have an understanding of what the issue is about and about how we best tackle it. The issue of the working group is one that needs to be addressed. The issue of correspondence and conversations with business is being addressed, and you know, again, that will involve tact, it will involve diplomacy, and it will involve us having a clear, concise picture of where we want to be and where we want to go.
Can I maybe just clarify? I think you maybe misunderstood Councillor Munro. She was very supportive of the working group going forward and was not seeking to oppose that. She felt that was very constructive. So it was just to just correct that would be my understanding.
Well,
is that correct?
Apologies if that's the case. I genuinely apologise. Okay. I was basing my comments on earlier comments from other members.
I appreciate that, but I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, Councillor Harris.
Convener, that's exactly one of the points I was going to make. I just wonder whether there's room for a bit of compromise here. I fully support the motion as it stands at the moment, but I appreciate my colleagues' concern about this being discussed in full by or all elected members being given the opportunity. As it appears here, we're agreeing, if we agree to this, we're agreeing to take forward the process. I wonder if it was explicit within that, as part of the process, that there's a member workshop that would allow every elected member, if they wish to take part, to get together. And if perhaps a compromise might be that if we embedded in this a resolution to have a very early workshop on climate change measures and zero carbon.
I think that's helpful, Councillor Harris, and I think perhaps that having an all-member workshop earlier in the process would be helpful. I do not believe that there is actually a division, but I think this is something that is really important that we do take forward. I think Falkirk could actually be sector leading in all that we are doing already, and as we have one of the biggest challenges, particularly around our relationship with industry in Grangemouth, then I think that we have a good story to tell, and there already is significant work already ongoing, and I think members perhaps want to hear more around that and about that modal change. Councillor Gardner, can I bring you back?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. And I would like to thank Nigel and Lynn for their input there, because it was pretty much down the line as we were thinking as well. We didn't just, when we went to put this together, I looked at the makeup of the other 4 council groups and what they had done, and we've actually went a bit further with the makeup of the group, with the 2 elected members from each political group, and also we're looking to get a representative for every high school along, because a lot of the pupils now are very involved in that anyway, which Robin would agree. But some of the other groups, they didn't. The all-members seminar was another sort of a new thing that we brought in, and we're looking to bring that in early in the process, maybe after just one meeting of the group, just to get the direction, and then bring the all-members seminar in. So we thought we had covered all bases to make it as fair for everybody here. So yeah, I'm surprised to hear the Labour's take on it, especially before they had read the motion. I think they had made the decision up, so that's quite strange. But there you go. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner, would you then be happy to, as an addendum to your motion, to have an all-member seminar put into the motion so it's explicit? Because that's not particularly highlighted, and I think that would perhaps alleviate some of the concerns. And I think that that's something we would want to have fairly quickly on the back of that, if you'd be happy to do that. And I would come to the Labour group to see if they would be content with that.
I can be there. I'm quite content with that, and I'd just like to say that we are fully supportive of the anything affecting on climate change. It's, as I said, it's of such importance, you know. So we're fully behind it. It's just that I felt it would benefit going to all members at the full council. But if all members are going to be included, well, I'm quite happy with that.
I think we all have a personal responsibility in this, and as individual leaders within our communities, we also have a personal responsibility to take that out. But we need to have the tools, the information, etc., to share with them. So I think that's one way of doing that. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. I think we were all saying the same thing, but what we were saying and taking it to full council is that it is important, and it is so important that everybody needs to be involved. But I think that the amendments put forward address that urgency, and if it wasn't going to next week's, then obviously we didn't want to delay it. I've got a couple of questions actually on the report, if we're finished that part of
Certainly, yes.
Thank you. Obviously, thanks very much for all the work that's been done, and it is indeed an emergency, and we do need to lead by example. On item 4.3 on page 7, oops, sorry, it says that we have got, wait a minute, I can't read my own writing here, I should have typed this, active pension. I think I'm meant to say, what do you mean by an active pension? It's like, what are the next steps? So I know that Falkirk Council signed an agreement that I can't remember the name of at the moment, about doing ethical investment, if I remember rightly. you're looking at me blank there, Brian. There was a big document that was signed on behalf of Falkirk Council about our pensions investment. And what I want to know is, we've done something, what are we going to do now? I think that we need to have a further debate about the investments and make sure that we aren't investing in any fossil fuel industries. And I don't think that that guarantee has been given by this council. And I think it's a debate that we need to have.
Convener, this is a significant area, a sensitive area, and has a number of strands to it. The first thing I think we need to highlight is that the pension fund is separate from the council. The council is one of over 30 employers who are part of the pension fund. So the first point is this distinction between the council and the pension fund as two separate entities. The second thing is maybe just to highlight just how focused and active and proactive the pension fund is in this area. Unfortunately, there's nobody from the pension committee who met yesterday here round the table. But on the agenda yesterday, there were several items specifically relating to climate change and the pension fund's position. One was, just to give you an illustration, because as I say, it is an important area and a topical area. One was seeking approval to go to tender to appoint a specialist advisor, an interface agent with companies with whom the pension fund invests, to push the need for appropriate action by individual companies to address this issue. Also on that agenda, there was notification that Falkirk Council is one of 11 funds that are signatories to a motion going to the Barclays AGM, which has attracted a lot of attention in the media. So we're one of 11 investors who have put a motion forward at the AGM pressing for that financial institution, clearly a major financial institution, to have more regard in its investment decisions, i.e. not lending to companies that have basically to invest in coal-fired power stations, for example. And this is one of the big areas, the big lines of attack in investment, is getting the financial institutions who are providing funds to the problematic companies to invest. We are members of several large entities. One is the local authority pension funds, which about 80 funds across the UK, and a big part of the activity of that aggregate entity has been lobbying companies, engaging with companies where there are issues around climate change. Not just climate change, but that's the focus of the discussion this morning, but other social and governance issues. We're a member of the International Climate Change Group. That is a pan-European group with aggregate funds of about 28 trillion and has considerable leverage and is engaging at the top level with the European Commission and with the United Nations, so has real leverage. And maybe the final point that I'll come to, which is perhaps at the core of this, the received wisdom is that the most effective way for funds like ours to proactively push and progress the climate agenda is not to divest, but to actively engage with these companies. And much of what I've said preceding this is about that very, very same agenda. If you divest all you do is pass your shares on to some other entity who, in all probability, has less interest in making any positive and proactive change. You're not choking off investment. All you're doing is transferring the concern, the issue, the problem across to another party, as I say, one in all probability who will be less active than you as a current holder. So our very clear stance in the pension fund is to treat this very seriously. It's way up our agenda, and as I've outlined, demonstrably we're proactively engaging with it, but we believe divestment, simple divestment, is not the effective way forward. It's not the responsible way forward. But we would reserve as a position, a reserve position, if after efforts to engage and a particular company shows disregard or no serious attempts to deal with the issues, then I think at that point divestment reasonably comes onto the table.
Okay. Thanks for that very fulsome answer and reminding me what I thought I knew but didn't about the Barclays. That's exactly what I was alluding to. And it was already mentioned about Australia. As far as I'm aware, Robert Murdoch is one of the ones that's investing in the coal industry in Australia. I rest my case, my lord. I think it might be worthwhile, though, if possible, and I don't know if it would be done as part of the working group that Paul's talking about, to have a bullet point statement so that we could let the public know exactly what steps we are taking already at the moment. And some of the things that you've said sound very positive, and some of which I was aware of, and some that I wasn't. So thanks very much for that. But I do think it's something that we should share with the general public to let them know what good work we are doing. That was the pensions one. The other points that I was going to say, I think I'm not sure that a meatless day in our working canteens would be as popular, but I do think that we should absolutely push for that in the schools and nurseries. I think that since it's my daughter that's dragging me kicking and screaming into veganism, I think if we start with them younger and break the habits, then I think that is something that we should be proactive about. The carbon literacy training, I think somebody else mentioned that as well. I think that is something that we do need to know because, again, until my daughter started beating me around the head, I was blissfully unaware of some of the damage that we were doing. So I do think that we as members need to be more aware and trained in ways that we can make a difference. The one other suggestion I was going to make, and I'm not sure whether or not it can be picked up from here, I know a lot of the taxis are now electric cars, which is actually where I got my idea for buying one when somebody came in to civic licensing. Is there something that we could do as an authority to encourage more taxi drivers, either by reducing their licences or by penalising those that don't have electric cars on the road? Now, obviously, there is impacts financially for taxi drivers to doing any of the above, but I think it is another road where we could have a positive impact in reducing the emissions and increasing the better air quality out there.
Just in response to that specific question, there is an element in there about taxi licensing as a matter for further consideration. So I think that would be a wider discussion.
Is that what you were alluding to?
The impact of that, the encouragement that could be given, yeah, so it wasn't intended to be a specific direction one way or another, but just highlighting that electric taxi use could be one of a number of strands towards sustainable public transport options.
Okay, so when are we doing that?
Don't have an answer to that one.
Yes, it is open to us to incentivise particular types of vehicles, and the current fleet requirements do incentivise electric and hybrid cars at the moment, along with cars with wheelchair access. So there is actually a policy position that incentivises those two types of vehicles at the moment. But I think there is consideration going to be given to giving further incentivisation. There's a current PDP established, chaired by the portfolio holder, and that's one of their next strands of work, as I understand it, is particularly to look at the issue of fleet specification. So I've not the slightest doubt that the issue of hybrid and electric vehicles will be one of the first areas of consideration.
Okay.
So I think that will be being looked at in a relatively short course.
Good, glad to hear it. And just one final comment. I think that we need to be aware in all of our debates that the 165 million, I know it's over 10 years, but our capital fund over the past week, it seems to be growing arms and legs, and I'm hoping that, you know, that money tree can afford all of these things that we see as key to the running of the council.
Just a comment around that there have been discussions directly with government, and that if they are committed to climate change, as we are in council, then there has to be funding streams to be able to support all of that. So it's not unrecognised that there's going to have to be input right across the board.
My cynical mind has just reminded me that if the government were serious about climate change, then why were they supporting INEOS over the back of public and professional advice to close the Bowness Road and to allow them to expand? But I'll leave that one for another day.
It's not a discussion for today, but there are arguments on both sides there. But just to say that our climate change, our climate agenda is going to have to be embedded in all our policies right across the council, and it is going to be from very granular level all the way up to the strategic policies. But it's up to us to be able to lead on those, and there's things that we can do just by changing the way we view things, the way we do things in the process that doesn't necessarily always involve money. And just to say, our canteen has gone vegan upstairs, and there are a number of items on the agenda that are not meat-based at all. Councillor Reid.
I think there are several questions arise, but I think we'll save them for the seminar itself.
I think that will give an awful lot more time
Which I think is a good
to
idea,
that.
Yeah. Only one point and one question. 2030 seemed a hell of a long time away, but now you're in 2020, it's looming ever closer. The figure of 165 million, it says extrapolated for the full council area. Does that mean non-council buildings as well as council buildings, or is that just council buildings?
Just to clarify, that's just the council's own
just
estate.
the council building.
Yep.
So it is a capital programme.
Yeah. And it is an extrapolation based on the two pilot studies, so there would be further work needed to be done there, but that's to give some indication of the potential scale of the investment
So
required.
extrapolated across every business in Falkirk, it's 1,000 million, probably.
It would be a far bigger figure.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Nimmo.
Just a quick question, convener. As you'll be aware, there's a whole load of new charging points going in at the stadium. I'm just wondering, are they going to be free to use, or are we going to charge for them? I haven't heard anything.
Okay, I will pass to officers. Robin?
At this point in time, potential charging for EV charging points is something that's on the list of savings income that's been proposed by officers. So that decision's not yet been made, will be made at the budget decision.
Because I just envisaged with the number of electric taxis that we currently have on the road, and with them increased, and I'd seen them all charging up for free overnight, just parked down at the stadium.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we will look to get a member seminar organised fairly quickly on the back of this, and I think it will take a good few hours. I don't think a 2-hour session is probably going to be enough within this, so we will take a view on how that's best managed and going forward, and we'll keep everybody informed. Content to move on? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item is item 7. It's the Council HQ and Arts Centre. Douglas?
Thanks, convener, and probably at the outset of the meeting we should have given apologies for Rona. She's unable to make the meeting today, but and certainly would have been presenting her reports, but Robin and I are covering for her. And this report gives an update on the Council HQ and Arts Centre project, another update on the importance of the project, as was discussed at the Council in November, and the report gives quite a comprehensive overview of the project, including the reasoning for the project and why it's necessary to move this forward, sets out the proposed requirements for delivery of the project, seeks the Executive's agreement that we should include the provision of a replacement Falkirk Library facility within those requirements, and seeks agreement to commence a procurement exercise that would test the market to identify prospective developers that might offer a suitable site and the means for delivery of the project. Following the procurement exercise, a report would be presented to the Council to recommend the preferred bidder, given details of the cost, proposed developer, the site, etc., and the anticipated benefits. I'll come back to the recommendations, but just to go through the report, in paragraph 3 we give details of the background to the project, and the work that was discussed at the November meeting of the Council, where we had appraised various options to bring the project forward, had set out 2 options in particular for further consideration. It also noted that we were working with Scottish Futures Trust on the prospect that this be a zero carbon facility. They're keen to work on the shape of future accommodation projects like this, and have given grant support of £45,000 to examine the zero carbon potential, and obviously that ties into the earlier report on climate change. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, it was agreed that a report will come to the Council on the 22nd of January to look at immediate ways to be supporting the town centre and address the concerns that had been discussed in some detail at the Council meeting, in particular relating to the work to revitalise Falkirk Town Centre through the partnership that was established last year. The report outlines a number of considerations for the project, starting off with the rationale for the project, which immediately relates to the deteriorating condition of this building, the complex of the municipal buildings and the town hall is dated, built in 1965, and is in a poor condition, with the main elements of the building, the roofs, external cladding, windows, heating, mechanical and electrical systems all requiring replacement. We have undertaken detailed assessments of this, and this demonstrates that it's not cost effective to refurbish the building. We did undertake some intrusive surveys of the building as well, reinforcing the concerns about the robustness of the structure, and that did highlight the risk around the structure of the building being similar to those designed prior to the incident in 1968 at Ronan Point, when there had been a progressive collapse in multi-storey buildings. And so all of that reinforces the point that a replacement for this building is necessary. Strategic property review has been a major focus of attention at the Council in recent months, and we have been doing quite an extensive review of all of the Council's assets, but that did include a detailed review of office accommodation, both the front and back office estate, and it demonstrates that the Council has more than enough offices and workstation capacity for its activities. We operate out of 18 offices. We have a floor space in operation that is more than double the national public sector benchmark, with almost 17 square metres per full-time equivalent member of staff. So we need to reduce the estate, and we're working to reduce the front office estate through the provision of advice hubs and rationalising there. But in addition, the back office review shows that 7 of our 8 front office premises are in excess of 30 years old and need upgrade. We have discussed and had agreement to a new benchmark square metres and a desk space ratio of 0.6 per FTE, to apply across the course of the new office strategy. And the estimates we have is that applying that ratio, we would require 700 workstations. The global climate emergency, again referring to the earlier report, does reinforce the need to do something about our property estate and reinforces the value in taking the zero carbon approach with this project, and that has been backed up by our work with Scottish Futures Trust, and they're very keen that coming from that work we would be able to demonstrate this as an exemplar for buildings of this across Scotland. In relation to the town centre, the HQ and Arts Centre is very much seen as a central element of revitalising the town centre. You're probably all familiar with the challenges that are facing town centres. News events last night were highlighting this right across the country. And the message very much about repurposing town centres and introducing other uses to them. That accords with the work that took place through our own partnership in Falkirk, and it helps to deal with the extent of challenge that the Falkirk Town Centre is addressing, where presently we support around 2,200 jobs, but we have been losing jobs in that sector as a consequence of the drop-off in performance of town centre retail, and vacancy rates have been increasing. So we have been working with the retailers and stakeholders in the town centre to evolve the vision for the town centre. We have an action plan in place, and the core of that is very much towards cultural regeneration and seeing that as the way forward for the town centre to help stimulate new activities and growth. Revitalising Falkirk is an important component of the investment zone initiative that we have been pursuing with Scottish and UK government to seek financial support to enable sustainable and inclusive growth within the council area, and measures to support town centres integral to that because they are seen as important to communities and also important to the business base. So we're moving forward that work on the town centre, and that will be reported again to council. In terms of the project requirements, we set out two of the options, option 4 and 5, that were identified as requiring further examination. And the section 4.5, 4.6 give an appraisal of these options, which suggests that we should be moving forward with the option built around 500 workstations and ancillary accommodation. That's for the reason that this enables the co-location of the largest group of staff, that we could accommodate circa 830 full-time equivalent staff at the 0.6 ratio, and we could reduce the number of back office buildings from 8 to 2. And importantly, that helps with delivery of our Council of the Future initiative, reinforces a one council approach, overcomes duplication and helps moving to a more agile way of working. It will help with co-location with partners, and we have been doing some work around that. It helps to achieve the carbon reduction benefits, with in particular in this option, meaning that we would no longer require to occupy the forum, which has a carbon benefit. That would be returned to the commercial portfolio for re-letting or sale. It also increases the regeneration benefits through the concentration of staff in the town centre and allows for the potential co-location as a major facility with the Arts Centre facility. It increases the vibrancy and usage of the facility. That medium-sized facility, we have undertaken an estimated capital cost using the municipal building site to come up with what that would be likely to cost if delivered by the market, and that suggests 53.73 as the combined costs. That acknowledges also the reduction in operational costs from the 4 other buildings that would be vacated as a consequence of that, and these are noted as 4.7, where Sealock House, the Registrar's Building, Rossvale and Cameron and Social Work Office, Denny Town House, Callender Square and Abbotsford House would all be proposed for disposal, potentially on the market or lease termination. We have taken on board the process of capital receipts and the revenue savings from those disposals in the financial model that's been put together for this. As mentioned, we have reinforced that the costings in this have been built around delivery of the building on this site, and we would continue to work on that as a benchmarking option for the project as a means of testing the value of the submissions coming forward from developers. At para 4.9, we reinforce the importance of retaining Falkirk Stadium. It's the most modern office accommodation we have. It has a vacant unit that has been provided with support from the council, and it's suggested that we should make an approach to the stadium company seeking to take the lease of those premises and fit out the premises for offices. We believe that's necessary for resilience purposes and gives backup should there be a failure in this or any other of the office locations that we occupy. It would also require some additional supporting measures to make the building work more effectively, and we're suggesting a cost of about £1.5 million to undertake that configuration of the accommodation and office fit-out. We also acknowledge the work that's taken place in relation to the delivery of the new central hub facility. That's an important front-facing facility for clients of the council. It needs a town centre location, and we have been working to come up with locations for that. Further work is to take place on that with our partners, and the intention is to bring a report back to this meeting with recommendations on that. The point about shared accommodation I've mentioned, but we are working with partners. SFT very keen to promote the idea of one public estate. They say no public building should accommodate a single occupant. It should have a range of partners involved, and we are working with them to look towards provision of space of about 50 to 100 staff who might occupy the building alongside us. The financial measures for that are being worked through just now, so not quite concluded on that, but we would look to allow for that in the procurement process. Quite in-depth work has taken place in relation to the development of the Arts Centre. We've worked with the Community Trust and their design consultants on the make-up of that facility and what it would mean in operational terms and in terms of the benefits for the area and for the town centre. The consultants have advised that the provision of a 550-seat Arts Centre facility with ancillary space is the recommended way forward, and that would enable the services to grow. And there's a full appendix in Appendix 4 that summarises the activities that would be supported through that measure. They suggest that that would result in the growth in income to the operator from admissions, as well as venue hire and the operation of a cafe bar during the day and into the evening. And the intention very much with this is that it would be a day round into evening round use of the facility, maximising the use of every area of space. We do note in this that there is a potential that options might come forward through procurement where bidders might suggest alternative means to manage and operate the arts facility, and we suggest that we should allow for that in the procurement process. In relation to the library and following a discussion at Council, we have done more work to look at the implications of relocating the library from the Category B listed premises in Hope Street. We note the range of activities that accommodates, but we do feel that there would be real merit in aligning the location of the library with the Arts Centre facility and with the office facility that we would bring forward in the HQ, and there would be real synergies in the activities that would be taking place there. It suggested a library of around 830 square metres would be required in the new building. We would also need to look to the reuse of the existing building, and we have a number of options being examined around out-of-hours services and data that might serve for that unit. We'd also need to resolve the library stores function that operates from that facility, but we do see real value in including the library as part of the scheme. We will also have to work through a number of items in relation to parking, access, the provision of a data centre and the relationship with other space users, in particular stores, etc. And the detail of that is continuing. Importantly, we need some specialist design and procurement advice in this process. We have appointed Brodie's, our external legal advisors, to assist in the procurement process, and we have specialist designers lined up to help with the further stages of this work. And they're essential to address the specialist architectural, acoustic, meter design, etc. matters that we will be getting into as this project proceeds. And therefore, they will help to prepare detailed design requirements and documentation, assess the options for delivery of the project on the municipal building site, and that will give us that benchmarked option. Importantly, we'll only be able to take that work to a level without incurring significant costs, so we would look to keep that probably to stage 1 of a design process so that that's there as a benchmarked option. But also we need to allow in the process that there may be a need to innovate, to transfer our design team to a selected developer if that's the cost-effective means of delivering the project and ensuring that our needs are being met through the working with them. Important to safeguard all of the Council's interests in that, and it's for those reasons that we're taking appropriate advice, and we will have to exert appropriate controls over project cost and delivery. Funds are contained in the capital programme for the work to be commissioned from this point, and we would look to proceed with that. And there is an appendix that gives detail on the phasing of expenditure that we anticipate. Importantly in this, as I say, there is an approval in the capital programme for the project of 45 million. We will need to see that adjusted if we do proceed with the library and ancillary items that are covered in the report. But we do see that as being the cap, an affordability cap to the delivery of the project, and that's covered in some of the appendices. Para 4.21 gives the detail of the proposed requirements. There is a table that sets out the anticipated makeup of the space, and Appendix 1 has the detail of the anticipated schedule of areas and anticipated costs that those would involve for provision. It is important in demonstrating the makeup of those spaces. We will be looking to make the most of the synergy in the shared spaces that are provided and making sure that there is full and active use of all of the building. In section C, we map out the procurement process for the project. We'd highlight that there would be an initial procurement phase, the European Single Procurement Document phase, where we would notify to the market our intention to proceed with the project. And at 4.23, we set out the anticipated timetable for the procurement process to proceed. Importantly, we would, following the ESPD process, we would get into a competitive dialogue with prospective bidders to work through their detail, the proposals in more detail, confirm their delivery methods, costs, etc. And that we anticipate to take place over the spring into summer of this year. We do highlight that that can be an intensive period of discussion and may stretch a wee bit beyond that, but we would only know that once we see the submissions coming back from bidders. Importantly, that will set out the arrangements for the method of delivery of the project, and whilst we do recognise and we anticipate that this will be wholly a new build scheme. We do acknowledge that some bidders may propose refurbishment of existing buildings. We are saying that they would need to give us a very compelling case for that, particularly given the cost implications and the climate change commitment that is proposed. As said, we will also be testing the municipal building site option, and we will be advising bidders of the potential to know that that is there as a benchmark against which their proposals will be tested. We're suggesting that we should include other town centre sites that developers may look to use in the course of delivery of the project, or as prospective receipts through other development that can help with the overall funding package. To assist the procurement, we'll also have an internal procurement group. We'll have external advisors, but we'll also have an internal group who will help to operate the whole procurement process and reach recommendations for the council. We'll give regular updates on the progress of that work to the Council of the Future Board, and at appropriate points in time back to this group at the Executive. On completion of the procurement, the final decision would be made with recommendations to the Council, and that would be presented ultimately to a meeting of the Council where a decision would be reached. We suggest in the report that that would be around September or October of this year, but that clearly that might extend depending on the process. I'm conscious elected members were keen to understand the assessment and selection matrix. We have included an appendix that details the assessment and selection matrix proposed, and we set out a number of elements that will be assessed. The bidder's approach to delivery of the project, the scheme concept, their deliverability, and therefore their means of guaranteeing its delivery as a project, the site location and how that relates to the town centre, the regeneration benefits, and the contribution to delivering the town centre vision, cost and affordability. And I would highlight in that and in the matrix that we are insisting that there is an affordability cap. So the budget that the council sets for the project would be a cap to the project within which the developers have to work. There is an additional criteria in relating to cost, which would relate to the whole life cost operations for the development, and also any other receipts or so that the developer can contribute to the project. We also highlight environmental sustainability, and would be working with SFT in the detailed set of criteria that we would use to test the schemes in relation to that point of the assessment. As I say, the proposed selection matrix is attached. We are also taking some advice from Scotland's Towns Partnership and DCOS in relation to the assessment of the regeneration benefits. Clearly that's an important consideration with the project. They have got experience of this in other places and have given advice, including some suggestions for the measurement of the impact that is anticipated by the development, and that's included in the appendix 3. In relation to consultation, we would be undertaking, there has already been a level of consultation, we would be undertaking further consultation with staff partners in the wider community on the project as it proceeds. That would also tie in with the work that's taking place in relation to the Town Centre Action Plan. I should highlight that there has been, and members are aware, that there has been some consultation with the local arts community that has taken place. There have been a couple of petitions put together. There's a video that the Community Trust put together that captured some of the views received from the arts community. And so that reinforces the range of comments and thoughts that people have about the value of this overall scheme. In relation to the financial implications, I've mentioned the point about the 45 million contained in the General Services Capital Programme. point also about the need to make an allowance for the additional cost of the library, and we suggest that that would be around 2.89 million. These are initial costs, but are costs we've put together with advice from our external advisors. We would need to look to adjust the capital cost in the General Services Capital Programme for consideration by the Council at its budget meeting. It is important to note that we do anticipate that there will be related costs in acquisition, site clearance, developer profit if we're not proceeding on a council-owned site. And so the municipal buildings has been the basis of the costing that we've done. It is possible that developers will incur additional costs in acquisition, site clearance and profit. They do know there's an affordability cap that they have to keep to, and therefore they have to demonstrate that their project can be delivered within that. We will also be looking to secure external funding support, and there is the prospect within the investment zone submission that's been made to the government that we would seek funding support for major projects of this type, and that will be the subject of further negotiation with UK and Scottish Government to see if that support can be given. There are examples of other growth deals akin to what we're doing that have achieved support for town centres and for arts facilities of the type we are proposing, and therefore we would look to make that case at the next stage. So as I say, the total project costs are 53.7 million, and the detail of that is shown in Appendix 5, taking into account all of the various elements of what we anticipate. Ultimately, again, that would be reported when it comes back to the Council for decision. In terms of resources, we're working this from internal resources supported with external specialist design, etc. support. We're also getting legal advice. Important that we comply with the European procurement rules. They are there, whilst there may be steps taken nationally to change these. I think it's important that we adhere to these for now. I don't see any prospect of them changing imminently, and therefore it is important to proceed as recommended. We have set out the risks, but I think I importantly have to emphasise the risks associated with this building and the urgency with the project. Do nothing is not an option. We have to move this forward. We've also taken on board the qualities and sustainability impacts. I've mentioned that a couple of times already. But in conclusion, we're asking that the Council agrees to proceed, agrees on the project requirements and proceeds to test the market for delivery of the replacement HQ and Arts Centre facility. It would be a major step forward for the Council in terms of its Council of the Future initiative and help with the transformation agenda that it's pursuing. Importantly, it would also play a valuable role in revitalising town centre and makes a major statement in investment in the area, which we are promoting through our investment zone and showing that Falkirk is a location where we can invest positively for the benefits of the economy and for the whole community. And therefore, we do consider that it's an important and signal statement of the commitments that we are making. So finally, just to cover the recommendations, we suggest that the Executive agrees the proposed requirements for the HQ and Arts Centre as set out in section 4.21 and Appendix 1 of the report. Note the progress of the initiative and that progress will be subject to agreement on the updated project costs achieved through the General Services Capital Programme, including those additional costs for the library. That we agree the assessment and selection criteria for the procurement process as set out in Appendix 2. Agree to appoint a design team to assist with the procurement exercise, including the preparation of the benchmark for the municipal building site. Agree to commence a procurement process to test the markets for the proposal as set out in section 4C on the basis of the competitive dialogue process. We recommend to proceed with formal notice to FCSL to undertake the fit-out of the first floor accommodation for resilience purposes, and we suggest that we report back to members on the outcome of the procurement exercise, recommending a way forward for final decision by Council. I should say that Leslie Malkin and Leslie are here in the room today, so if there's additional questions around their work, we can give advice to you.
Okay, thank you, Douglas, for that very comprehensive overview of the report. And I would like to say, well, all of what you've said and more. But I think there was consensus when we established that it's not an option to do nothing. Staying in this building isn't something that is sustainable, and therefore we have to look to move forward. And that's where we are today with this report. It's the next step in the process. And in agreeing this next step, we continue to give a level of confidence to the town centre businesses and indeed to our local communities, that Falkirk Council are committed to revitalising our town centre, and in doing that is seeking to act as a catalyst by putting our arts centre and council buildings within our town centre area. If we don't, we already know that there's 2,300 jobs at risk, and these are eroding as we speak right now. Therefore, we have to continue to move forward with this project. The Arts Centre is a key catalyst to revitalising our town centre. We know from up and down the country that we have to look at alternative activities within town centres in order to create that footfall and create that sense of place, to enable people to want to live there, and everything else that would then follow from around retail and hospitality that will then support that community. But you know, again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. The public sector has a responsibility to actually act as the catalyst to delivering that, and that is what we have to do. There are risks in that, and obviously cost is a major impact, but by looking to manage that, by having the cap there that allows developers to see what they can deliver from within that cap, it allows us to move forward. Climate change is obviously one of our key drivers in any new building, and taking up the opportunity to work with FST on a zero carbon building can again demonstrate our commitment to climate change and act as an exemplar to others. And I don't just mean within Falkirk, across the whole of Scotland as being an exemplar and driving that forward. By reducing our council estate and bringing everybody into one building, again, helps to address all of those issues. In relation to Falkirk Stadium, it is one of the newest buildings that the council own. It's in a good condition, and those that were involved in the workshop last week would have heard that is one that, under the principles of the SPR, is one that we would look to retain and invest in. We have already started to see some of the council buildings fall over. We cannot afford for business continuity to be in a position that this building falls over without a backup, and that's why it is quite crucial that we continue to find that backup, and the stadium would be something that would be worth investing in for the longer term, and that's not the first time that that's been discussed within this committee and going forward. And bringing in the library into the new council building enables a new modern facility that is fit for purpose to be developed and meeting our customer needs. We already know that the Trust are finding real challenges in meeting their efficiency savings, and one of the proposals was around shutting facilities. I think this would enable savings to be made on both sides, from council and from the Trust, particularly in the longer term, by co-locating the facilities and being able to repurpose our libraries into something that is more modern and able to be flexible and be used. I think we have attempted to cover as much as possible around the caveats around cost by having cost cap, while at the same time not being specific around site or indeed design. We give a specification and we leave the ability for developers to have flexibility and be innovative about how they can deliver this on our behalf. And I think that the competitive dialogue will enable members to be actively involved in that, because I believe at the end of the day, while we want to have this new arts centre and council building, there needs to be something that is a draw to the town centre. It needs to have an iconic aspect to it that says this is Falkirk and it's the place to be. I know there's been a mammoth amount of work going into pulling all this together. I appreciate the time and effort that officers have gone to develop this, and I know how much personal buy-in there is from officers and wanting to see this happen. This is the biggest investment that Falkirk's seen for over 20 years. It's one that can actually be truly transformational, not just for us as a council, but for the whole of the Falkirk area, and can create that economic stability if it is planned in the right way and going forward. So I'm happy to move the report.
Formally second and reserve the right to come back.
Thank you, Cecil. I think we all watched I hope everybody watched the programme with Panorama yesterday, where we looked at Stockton, which was a town maybe twice the size of Falkirk, which has a population of 85,000. And they're undergoing a regeneration like we are. And one of the things they were doing, and they were doing many things, they'd actually created open spaces for entertainment. They had a massive events programme. They were aware of the issues of big shops. And they had agreed to upgrade their theatre facility, and originally they thought it was going to cost £1 million, but it had actually moved on to 19 million. And what was being said was that this was a huge risk to them. This is a town much bigger than we are, with a much larger population, putting itself at risk for 19 million refurbishment of a facility. So if we look at what we're trying to do, we're trying very hard to replace this building, bring staff together, eradicate duplication, enable co-location with other partners, maximise carbon reduction, increase regeneration benefits, and share space with libraries and hubs perhaps. None of these things require us to have an arts centre. And if we were to, we would be putting all our eggs in one basket, because, as this programme showed yesterday, we need a whole range of things, including people who would market and encourage events in our towns and repurpose the space, because many of these shops units that are out there empty, and there are 30 up the high street, are too big for the purpose that they will be used for today by smaller shops. So there's a whole issue around this. So we have an option of 4 or 5 sites in the town, but we don't own any of those sites. And were we to procure or decide upon another alternative, there are all sorts of issues around parking too, because we already have evidence that at peak times we do not have much parking capacity. So there are a whole number of questions and issues that we have to look at. The biggest one of all is finance, because this isn't the only thing we want to do. We need to do more things in terms of education, in terms of our children, in terms of dealing with the challenges posed by the rationalisation of our properties. And we all sat at a meeting last Friday which looked at our property portfolio, and it's going to take away properties right across the whole Falkirk district. It may be that we're going to lose 2 of our town halls. Yet here we are proposing a bright, new, shiny facility for the centre. So there are lots of aspects to this that we need seriously to consider. And I have a number of questions around this. If we are to have a facility that includes an arts centre, will it be cost neutral? What is the timescale if we choose a site other than this one? Because the costs we're basing this on, the 45 million, are based on us using a site we already have, which also happens to be the best site in the whole area. I can't see another site that would come anywhere close to this. So if we chose one of these other sites, that would mean you would have to wait while land purchases were made and negotiation, and the timescale would erode even further. So that's not going to help the town centre now. What would help the town centre is if we actually had a modest building, a new HQ here, and we were able to bring together, get rid of the silos, all these people from Abbotsford House and Sealock, and we would have an increased footfall 2 minutes from the town centre. I would like to know what that likely timescale is. I would like to know what are the challenges if we have 500 people based in the town centre in terms of car parking. I would like to know whether we are talking about a facility that's cost neutral in terms of an art centre. And I think we should address all of these things before we make these kind of decisions.
Okay, Douglas.
Happy to pick that up, Councillor. I think importantly, and the answer to a lot of your questions we're suggesting would come through this process. We would be able to ask the market and ask developers to bring forward their solutions and demonstrate what they would deliver, what that would cost, what their timescale for delivery would mean, and what the sites are that they would present to us, what that would mean for the town centre. So part of the difficulty we have just now is we just don't know, because we don't know what's out there. We do know that there's real and active interest in the decision that the council wants to make, and that pending that decision, developers might be able to work with us and deliver something, but also if they see that that's not possible, it will allow them to move on. And part of the difficulty I mentioned at the council meeting last time was the uncertainty that this is creating for developers who want to spend money in our town centre, who want to do other things, whether that be introducing housing, other offices, hotel accommodation, student accommodation. These are uncertainties just now because of the uncertainty with our own decision. So part of the point of this is to go to the market and find out what it is possible to do. And as I say, I'm pretty, confident that we will have quite realistic propositions put back to us, because I know that people have been speaking about it and have teams lined up to actually work up solutions for us. So I think that will help to resolve a lot of the questions that you have. The timescales for it we have set out in the table at 4.23. These are ambitious and they are contingent on a lot of the steps being able to be followed through quite smoothly. There will be uncertainties to confront in this, and it is possible that those timeframes might stretch. But I think the overall imperative, as we're saying, is to see the replacement to this building and to keep up the momentum of this activity and move it on as quickly as we can. That will help the town centre, and it will help with the transformation that we're trying to achieve as a council.
That's 5 years, we're looking 2025, and that's if there is no negotiation.
Well, This allows for a level of negotiation, so we have allowed for that competitive dialogue process to take place during the latter part of the spring through into the summer, with the recommendations coming to the Council September or October of this year. So that depends on what we get back, but I think we certainly have been working as quickly as we can, given the complexity of it. We know the urgency of this building. We have real and active concerns about the Council's position here. So we do want to work through it quickly. But I think we also realise the scale of the prize here. This can be a fantastic building. It can really bring together a mix of uses in a new and vibrant ways that are different, and really put Falkirk's opportunity really out there as something significant. I know Stockton, I know background in Stockton is, in many ways has parallels to Falkirk, its industrial history and all of that. What Stockton doesn't have, and no offence to anybody from Stockton here, but Falkirk's now on the tourist map. People want to visit Falkirk, they want to come here. We believe this facility is what's missing in the makeup of tourist attractions in the Falkirk area, and would play a huge role in moving that forward. That's why it's in the investment zone package. We think we can convince people to invest for that purpose, to help attract visitors, and that really puts Falkirk on that map. So it really gives confidence to developers. We want to invest, we want to transform the economy, we want to attract people to the area and to help the town centre.
Just to add to that, I don't think the land acquisitions within the town centre will necessarily be a barrier. Remembering that there's been some large empty properties for quite some time, and the value of those isn't that significant because they cannot be repurposed as they are. So I think that there is easy options there for developers in looking at the sites, and I don't think that necessarily that will be a significant barrier going forward. But just to remind everybody that this building is attached to our town hall. If there is no building here, if this is demolished and rebuilt, even our town hall falls over, we do not have an arts facility. And I think a town the size of Falkirk needs to have an arts facility, because we will lose footfall, we will lose tourists, we will lose a facility for local people if we do not have that, because we do not have enough by way of facilities already within the Falkirk area, and we know that from what the arts community are telling us. Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. A couple of questions for Douglas. I know I already asked about the affordability regarding the weighting of the assessment selection criteria, and I thank you for the further clarification of some of the categories. The affordability, I'm still trying to get my head around this. It was weighted at 15%, and as has already been alluded to, the affordability of this, given that it is public money that we're talking about here, is my key consideration. My granddaughter starts school this year, and she'll be celebrating her 45th birthday when we've finished paying for this. So we need to get this right. It's not for now, it's not for us, it's for the next 40 years of debt that we need to make sure we're getting value for money. The affordability in your table you had set at 15%, and you're saying that it's because there is that spending cap. Is that cap dependent upon what we decide today, or is it already set at the 45 million that we had agreed in the capital programme?
As you say, the current budget is 45 million. That's in the capital programme. We're suggesting, as a consequence of today, we would seek to have that adjusted in the report that goes to the February budget meeting of the Council, and following that adjustment, that would confirm the affordability cap. They were suggesting that would be 53.7 million. It includes the allowance for the delivery of the library, which we're suggesting would be included. What we would allow for is that there is the provision that external funds could come forward, so it's possible that whilst that's the total project cost, we might get other money in to meet that cost, so that would reduce the cost to the council.
But as it stands, the affordability, we'd be going out to the market to say we've got 53.7 million to play with rather than 45.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Brian, can you remind me, and I should know this, for every extra million that we borrow, how much every year is that extra in interest costs, which comes out of the revenue budget, which comes out of services that we'll be providing for the next 40 years?
I think a robust reference figure is about 55,000 per million.
Okay, so we're looking at, I'm trying to do my mental sums here, but it's just, we bandy these figures around and it's like $1 million is a lot of money and we're just throwing in an extra 5 or 6 on top. But that's why I wondered why affordability wasn't given more of a weighting, and I think it should be, because we are spending everybody else's money here.
Absolutely, and no sense to belittle that. What we're saying is that there's an affordability cap, so we're setting that at the 53.7 million.
Although council only agreed to 45.
Subject to council agreement.
Right, okay.
So once that's set, it's set. That's what we anticipate it will cost. What we are saying is that there would be an additional measure for assessment of cost and affordability at 15% of the overall scoring, and that's built around what the developer proposes in terms of the operating costs of the building, the offer that they make for receipts, etc., from sites that we might put towards the cost of delivering the project.
Okay.
But that would be once we see what it is they're proposing, what they anticipate the costs are going to be, and being able to assess in detail over time what the cost of that is going to be. And so we acknowledge this is a massive decision. It's a decision that will last 40, 50 years, but it's about the prospects for your town centre, the prospects for the council over that time frame.
We've had this sales pitch, Douglas, ad infinitum at the moment anyway. I'll just try and stick to the points of clarification. The other one is the term procurement. What guarantee have we got that in going to the market, we're absolutely not going to bind this council in any way? And again, this is probably my lack of commercial awareness or whatever, but the word procurement may have different connotations for other people. Is it, you know, can we call it an expression of interest? Can we call it a tender? There's lots of different terms that all vaguely mean the same thing. I just need to know that in going forward, I absolutely agree that doing nothing is not an option. I mean, it's been going on for enough years, and we argued many years ago that this building needed to be dealt with. But I don't want to say that in going to the market and in getting further information, we commit this council to these kind of numbers for 40 years.
This is an important decision, as we're acknowledging. Once the process starts, you are asking the developers to commit resource towards working up their proposals. The level of that work will grow as we get through the initial stage and then into a competitive dialogue process and into final tendering. So the scale of that work will increase and the scale of the cost to them will increase. It's where patently it becomes a real serious proposition, and akin to the level of detail that was done back in May 16 when we looked before at the prospect for delivery of the HQ project. It's that order of work that we would be asking the developers to undertake.
Yeah, and with all due respect, the developers' costs aren't my primary concern, this council's cost.
No,
and we've got 45.
I'm just going to come to that, because at the end of that process, we would have a fully worked up and costed scheme. That will come to the council for decision.
Right.
At that point, the council can decide, yes, it agrees to proceed with that, or no, it doesn't. At the point where it says no, it doesn't, it goes right back to the start and has to think, what does it do now? What we will have is very initial, stage one, as I say, assessments of what we might do here, but effectively you're having to go back to the start of the process.
I understand that, but that's what I wanted to hear.
But what I would also advise is that we would need to make sure through that process that we're not likely to incur challenge from developers who, given the order of work that they have undertaken and the scale of commitment that they're demonstrating to it, that they would feel that they have been treated unfairly through that process when the council had made up its mind already. I think it's
we're all agreeing
to,
that we do need
yeah,
more information. It's a big decision, and we need to have the information required
It's
to make
important
that.
to stress that yes, the council can decide it wants to proceed or it does not, and developers will be aware that there is that risk at the end of the process, but we have to watch for the risk of challenge, and Colin's team, our external legal advisors, will keep us advised through the process, and we will be advising the council of the future board as this is progressing to make sure that that's kept online.
Okay. With regard to the size of office requirements, obviously it's extremely regrettable that the drop in employment in high streets across the whole of the UK. How many jobs have we lost in this organisation within the past, say, 10 years? Anybody know?
The next 5 years is in the next report.
I mean, previously, a 600 FTE came into my head, but I can't remember where I got that. But the point I'm trying to say here is that in highlighting the loss of employment, and I know people who have lost their jobs up in the high street, as I say, it is regrettable for anybody losing their job. I also know positions that are no longer available in the council for employment, and the thought that came into my head was, I don't see any growth in employment by the council anytime soon. And I think we need to be very, very aware, I think I emailed you about this, about the need for administrative posts and a headquarters to fulfil jobs that may not be in existence in 20 years' time, as we heard at the Education Executive.
Well, that would be contained
Anyway,
within
it's
the
just,
business
it's
plan.
a point that I want to raise, that we need to be aware of jobs per se, not just retail jobs, but that council jobs will be implicated by the funding that we put towards and the debt that we take on for this new project.
Absolutely. I mean, I think important to stress that the estimate of the office staff that we're looking to accommodate through this front office provision has been the subject of discussion with managers around the council. So that's taken on board the work they've done for the Council of the Future business plan and anticipates the workforce numbers they see at the end of that. And that aligns, therefore, that in 2024, when we're looking to move staff into the building, the staff they anticipate having at the end of that period can be accommodated in the building at the 0.6 ratio that we are suggesting. We do acknowledge we need to be flexible, and the point with the building is having that flexibility that you can accommodate changes in how the council works, how other partners are working. But the principle here is town centre first, and urging that the town centre be the main location where office staff are accommodated, and that gives all the synergies that we've discussed.
Okay, well, on that I think I'd like to move an amendment. I don't think, as I said, I might be being presumptuous, but I think everybody around the table's already said that this building needs to be replaced, and that the concept of the strategic property review is self-evident. And we do need to lead by example with the zero carbon buildings with regard to the climate emergency. But again, like last night's Panorama programme made it obvious, this isn't a problem that is just specific to here. But I don't remember hearing any of these councils investing the 50-odd million that we're talking about. But however, I think the report indicates an exciting potential concept, the modern HQ and the new art centre, and I don't believe anybody that would argue that either of these is a bad thing. But the officer's report is written and it's based on a number of assumptions. The first one being that the project is affordable. The second one is that the project is compatible with the SPR, and that third, as you've just said, consistently, is that locating the council headquarters by less than 1,000 metres from here and building the new art centres will revitalise the town centre. So at the moment I see it that we're living in the real world, and it's our job to scrutinise these assumptions There's plenty of large-scale projects that have gone off the rails in the past because of over-optimistic assumptions at the initial stages. 2 in Edinburgh alone, the Parliament and the trams, we don't have to look very far to see how far they went over budget. Carrying out proper scrutiny on behalf of current and future taxpayers, it's not playing politics and it's not lacking vision, nor is it being a Philistine, as I've been referred to in the past, and it's not ignoring the town centre retailers. It's actually our legal duty to do this properly. So I think if we're looking to test these assumptions, the first one is it affordable? Well, maybes. And that's why we're going to go through with this, but I know for sure that the proposed benchmark case isn't. The proposed capital expenditure of 53.7, when our capital programme is set at 45, gives a net additional revenue cost of 2.2 million every year for the next 40 years. The next item on the agenda is the projected financial outturn, and it's already predicting a 2.3 million overspend, which reduces our reserves from 11.3 to 9 million. Adding an extra 2.2 million spend every year for the next 40 years for this new building, I don't think is financially sustainable. Is it compatible with the ASPR? I attended the members' workshop, as many as I've did, and I completely agree with the principle. And what impressed me about it is that the devil is in the detail, and I think that's what we need to be looking at here. Rationalising buildings has to address numerous practical challenges, and the whole point is to save money. This report advocates disposing of buildings worth 1.2 million in order to spend 54 million. That's a revenue saving of 2 million, but an extra revenue spend of 4.2. That's not transforming the council. That's catching a fast train to bankruptcy. Thirdly, will the project revitalise the town centre? Well, many people have told me that they think so, but they cannot know this. 20 years ago, nobody predicted the decline of the high street that we're seeing now. The consultant's annual spend on the high street for this project, over and above business as usual, is predicted to be 1.9 million a year. The report's baseline case would incur additional revenue spend by the council of 2.2 million. So the council spends 2.2 million of public money to generate an extra 1.9 on the high street. Well, I'm no Brian Smale, but even I can see that that's not a great financial return on investment. The committee needs to take a reality check, and we need to ask the question, what has to happen to make this happen, and what will it cost? What are the implications on our services, not just now, but for the next 40 years? If this project means more cuts and more closures, the administration must be open and say so to the general public. We'd suggest a different approach. We're happy to test the market, but make it clear that it's solely for the preliminary stage and that no final decision will be taken until these have all been assessed. Affordability is the biggest single criteria and it's the biggest risk, and this must be number one in any assessment. And thirdly, we don't commit to the library at this stage, and there's no need to commit to the stadium just yet. I think these decisions need to be made and predicated upon the information that we get back. Find out if there's private sector and funding sources available by all means, but we need to test these assumptions before we rush headlong into what could be Falkirk's Darien scheme. On this, I'd like to propose an amendment. I'm not sure, do we want to change the amendment at this point, or do you want to take a...
Well, we'd rather see the amendment.
You'd rather see it first, but I'm not sure
honest,
if,
we
given
can't
what
take a
we've
view.
spoken about the affordability, do we want to take a recess for a few minutes? I was looking for clarification on the weighting put to the affordability, and having heard from both Colin and Douglas about why it was set low, we might need to have a further debate on it.
Well, I was intending to call a recess anyway, but we usually need to see the amendment. And we need to get a bit of clarity on the figures that you've given, Joan, because you've banded around a number of figures that don't actually put in context.
Okay. Convener, if you're going to get clarity on that, I appreciate the numbers and the charges there, but can we also get the savings? Because if you've not got a certain amount of buildings and things like that,
all these figures were taken from the report.
Together,
yeah, but I think we need to see the amendment before we can take any view.
Okay, well,
it wouldn't necessarily be over 40 years, and there's a number of factors that I think haven't been taken into account in the statements that Councillor Coombs has made there, but we'll address that once we actually see what it is that's being proposed.
okay, that's what was quoted in the report. That's where I got the figures from. Douglas is nodding there. Can I just say, I'm happy to share that, but just with the proviso that I may change. As I say, I had looked at the weightings without the knowledge of... Do you want to take
a couple of minutes to sort that out and then come back?
Well,
and we'll look
if
at
you
the
want to have a
amendment?
look at the rest of it, the only change that might be made would be the weighting on the affordability. I'm happy to share it so that you can look at what we're talking about here. Do you want me to read it out, or...?
It'd be helpful.
Right, okay. There's 5 parts to it, but then I would need to amend something else. Council agrees to the proposed requirements for the Council Headquarters and Art Centre project, which may also include the Falkirk Library if bidders wish to set it out as in Appendix 1 of the report. Council notes that progress of this initiative will be subject to the updated project cost being agreed on the Council's General Service Programme 20 to 25. A lot of it is similar to the original. This is the part 3 of it. Council amends the preliminary assessment selection criteria to be, and as I say, I had changed the weighting of that because of the unknowns about the affordability cap being put on, so that may change. Item 4, Council agrees to appoint a design team to assist with the assessment of, and I changed the word procurement to expressions of interest, again because I was looking for clarity on what exactly we were committing to if we agreed to go to procurement. But I think I'm happy with Douglas's explanation this morning, so we can use either expressions of interest or procurement, whatever the legal people decide, as long as we know that we're not promising to spend money until we know more information. Including the working up of a baseline option for the comparison purposes of a 320 workstation on this current municipal building site. So the lower of all the options should be our baseline comparator. And finally, Council agrees to commence the expressions of interest from development partners with the initial submissions to be considered by Council in October 2020 after public consultation. That's basically it. It's not a million miles from what was there, and the only item that I might, as I say, consider changing is... So I'm formally... Well, do I formally move that just now, or do we wait until I come back and see if those numbers...
You can formally move that if you wish. Just now.
And I can still change the affordability weighting.
Yes,
yeah?
That's...
Okay.
Convener, I'll happily second that. I'd just like to make it clear to business people that are here today that this is not a green light for any HQ Arts Centre project. It's another step in that direction just to test the market. It may well be that when the figures come back, they're not, we don't agree with them and we would put forward our proposal. But we're wrong to go further down the line and just see where we are. And I just wanted clarity on the fact that we're not tied into any contracts or anything like that. And I think Douglas has confirmed that, although some companies may have concerns down the line and they may have legal challenges around that. But I'm quite comfortable with going forward to procurement and we'll see what comes back, and then we'll discuss the amendment and see how the vote goes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 15 minutes. Okay, Councillor Coombs, you want to come back on your amendment?
After listening to officers under governance, I think that I'm happy to withdraw the amendment. But the one key issue that I still want is that there are 2 important things here, that this is public money and that we need to be very, very, very aware of that. and that this is not the green light. This is, we'll go a step further forward, and if all the carrots that are being dangled actually come to fruition, then great, I'll become a vegetarian and eat carrots for the rest of my life. But we also need to take consideration for the general public. There are specific groups, obviously some here today, and the arts and civic people who are very keen for all of this project to go ahead, but there's thousands of others outside that we also need to take consideration of, the people whose villages don't have a proper bus service, and the people who complain about the potholes, because the decision on a new building will impact all of these services going forward for a long, long time. So we need to know that we're gathering information, we're happy to see what comes forward regarding funding and what have you, but we need to be aware that the public need to be considered and consulted with, and that the final decision comes back to full council for all members with a lot of information. And I apologise for not being aware of the information needed when I pulled the amendment together. Perhaps more open and transparency.
That's okay, because I hope that that allowed you know, further clarification in doing that. I think a high-profile project such as this will attract public attention, and the views of the public will have to be sought at some point in the process, an appropriate point when we have something that is more robust to be able to share with them, and that's why we have the various fora, etc., that where we can take that information to. But I can rest assured that having over the last sort of year that the public are very engaged in this process and are very quick to share their views on this going forward. But I do appreciate that it's one of the biggest decisions that the council has to take, and we have to be robust in that process. As you're correct, it is public money. But this is just another step in that journey, and we're not at the final point yet. That is still to come. Any other comments, Councillor Munro?
I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that whatever transpires, it's going to take a great deal of time, maybe 5 years, and therefore we need a meaningful working group in the town centre, not a talking shop, that looks at other small measures that can take place that are going to help now.
And that is already in process. There's an action plan that's been drawn up by the Town Centre Forum, and that is in process of implementation. And there is a report that comes next week that actually shows the progress on that. And believe me that there are real actions being taken on that, and it's across all sectors, including those that are retailers and businesses within the town centre, and what they can contribute to that. So it's not a talking shop, it is something that actually is being delivered on. Councillor Reid.
Yes, I think what we cannot do and what would be irresponsible is to march the people to the top of the hill as we did in November and then take them back down again in January. So that's why it was important this positive decision be made today. You can't do that. It's not fair on anybody concerned. As we say, we await the results. Perhaps the hurdles are passed now and running a kind of marathon up until October, but it's progress, and that's the main thing. Ambition is very good. Yes. Okay, no, sorry. I'll go. Do you want me to start over again? No, I made reference to the Grand Old Duke of York. You can't take people up the hill in November and down in January. No, sorry. That's okay. And it's important that we make a decision. But the ambition has to be tempered with reality.
Absolutely.
I think that the retailers are in that same line as well. They have ambitions, but they're faced with reality. So I'm very glad that there has been a consensus today. It's helpful.
It has indeed been helpful. Any other members? Happy to agree? Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Clearly this budget round's been particularly problematic because of the timing of the budget. We've now got the Westminster position resolved with the 11th of March, and very recently the Scottish Government announced their own budget would be ahead of that on the 6th of February. So that's very welcome and helpful in terms of removing that degree of uncertainty. We do, however, know from previous years, most recently the past few years, that that's not the end of the matter. We get the settlement, but it still needs the numbers to be navigated through the Scottish Parliament. And we don't know how problematic that will be this year and how long it will take. So there's still that element of uncertainty in the mix. It's perhaps worth noting that a key player in recent years certainly has been the Scottish Green Party. And they, I think, as I understand it, have explicitly stated that their, in inverted commas, asks this time round aren't as local government centric as they have been in the past, which in some respects may be unhelpful, but may mean that what we get announced on the 6th of February doesn't in fact move very much. But again, just illustrative of the uncertainties. I think from the Falkirk Council specific perspective, there's maybe a few things to consider, and I emphasise this is just initial thoughts, largely my own, and there needs to be discussion with the Chief Executive, Governance and members in terms of how we actually take it forward. But I don't think it does any harm maybe just to bring into play some of the practical considerations that we will need in the very, very near future to consider. So we're currently sitting with an agreed budget date for the 26th of February. So I think the first question is, given this latest information, is that doable in terms of having our normal complete budget ready for that date? One, given what I've just said, would perhaps question whether that's going to be possible. That then takes you into the territory of potentially decoupling the critical element for billing purposes of announcing the council tax ahead of the rest of the budget. So I would readily acknowledge this is an aspect that's not entirely clear legally, and we in due course would wish to get a view from the monitoring officer on that. But we do know in practical terms that we already have precedent, and we have had the Controller of Audit indicate before one of the Scottish Parliament committees that that's something that he believed was doable. So it still needs to be nailed, but I suspect most councils in Scotland are thinking along those lines, just given the unique nature of the current year. So potentially what we may, and I emphasise may, decide to do is still shoot for the 26th of February, but only geared to council tax, and then have another date penciled or penned in for the first half of March, when we will have a definitive position and the rest of the budget can go forward at that point. So I emphasise these are still decisions to be taken, but it gives you a sense of what we do need to decide. And maybe in the back of that, to just emphasise that with that clarity on the dates, it perhaps can and should act as a trigger to re-energise the process, with all players, both on the officer and the member side, needing to accelerate the necessary work to be able to produce, you know, the budget booklet, the due date. So I would urge the political parties to progress their consideration of the options that are on the table, with a view to getting to a position where you as a party or a group know what you're going to do, and then we're in a position to maybe pull things together. So that's perhaps as much as I can helpfully, or maybe in some quarters unhelpfully, say in terms of how I see things sitting. But I do think very, very shortly after this meeting, there needs to be a firming up of what particular path we're going to take.
I think that would be welcome by all members, knowing exactly the process that we're going to adopt going forward. And I do know that the setting of the council tax aside from the rest of the budget will be challenging. However, in order to get the council tax bills out and prevent particularly our most vulnerable as in receipt of council tax reduction being impacted, it's something that we have to do and as part of the process. It's not one that we've been controlling, but we do have to be able to react and be able to adapt to. Okay, Brian, do you want to speak briefly to the projected financial position?
I wonder if I may ask a question. The question to the budget, that is the investment zone money. I happen to have the television on. I don't usually watch Parliament, but this strange man who turned out to be the new Scottish Secretary looked particularly inept, to be honest. But he did mention that the deal for the islands was now complete and that Falkirk was imminent, I think was the word he used.
The deal from the islands is not complete. It's not complete. And he did mention Falkirk, and there has been indications from Westminster that they hope to be able to conclude Falkirk before the islands. Before the islands, and we're actively in discussions with UK government around that. There has been an indication from the Secretary of State that he would wish to visit Falkirk and see the extent of the investment zone area. So we're working with officials to try and make that happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Sorry, Brian.
Okay, Convener. So this is the last revenue projection report for the current financial year, and this one assumes particular significance being on the cusp of the revenue budget, and in particular in terms of the reserves position, which we'll come to in the body of the report. So picking up in section 4.1, the general fund, the position is noted in para 4.1.2, is for effectively an overspend of 1.4 million, which is quite a significant adverse movement from the last report in October. And if we turn to section para 4.1.3 in terms of children's services, the story really lies therein. You can see in the headline there that the projected position is for an overspend of 4.4 million, with the bulk of that now coming from the education side of the house. And that's largely building into the projection the recognition that the refinancing is now very unlikely to progress. There's a story behind that, which is perhaps for another day, but I think it's prudent at this late point, notwithstanding during the course of the year we've put markers down that it was uncertain. I think we've reached a tipping point where, on the strong balance of probability, that won't happen. We've also, at the tail end of that first section there under education, factoring in the results of the school transport tender, which unfortunately is another hit. The social work side of the house, still a significant over budget position there. It's improved since we last reported, which is welcome, but that's reflecting the underlying driver here, which is the legislative requirements relating to younger people in placement. You'll be well familiar by now with the major Council of the Future project, the Closer to Home strategy, and over the coming months and years we would look to see the benefits of that initiative, both in service terms and financial terms, coming through. I won't dwell on the other services because they're thereabouts relative to budget, and in interest of brevity, move on. In terms of big movements, on page 109, we've got, as was the case previously reported, the helpful counterbalancing positives of the capital financing costs being 1.5 million under, and also the grant position of a similar value. So that's helping to counterbalance the pressures we've just talked about in children's services. We touched, for the sake of completeness, on the Integration Joint Board. notwithstanding it's the board's responsibility for managing their own budget, but I know members are keen just to have a finger on the pulse. They're showing, at the time this was prepared, projected overspend of about 600,000-700,000, but they do have a recovery plan in place, which hopefully by the year end will arrest that and bring it back, if not to budget, closer to budget. We pick up on 4.3, this element that we've introduced this year just to allow tracking of budget savings. Other than the NPDO refinancing, which I've touched on, all the others are on course to deliver, which is very positive. 4.4 picks up in the General Fund Reserve. So with that revised net position, we anticipate a balance of 9 million at the end of the financial year. The next section, 4.44, is deals with the Repairs and Renewals Fund, and that has a number of sub-components for different services, and there's a short narrative and balance for each of these. And 4.45 is the earmarked reserves, and they're pretty static during the course of the year, so there's nothing significant to comment there in, relative to previous reports. 4.5 just gives you some trend data on the workforce in terms of redeployment, VS, staff numbers, FTE. There's only a short section on the HRA at 4.6, and that's reflecting the fact that the HRA, as has been the case throughout the course of the year, is pretty much on budget, so there's no exceptions to report. And that takes us back to the recommendations at section 2 at the front end.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I don't think there's any surprises in this final quarter report that's come forward. The overspend, some we've been in control over and some we're not in control over. Ones that we do have the ability to influence around children's families social work has started to be mitigated, but the Closer to Home programme is still at early stages and still requires to filter through in order to have the greater impact that we expect to get from that. But the fact that there has been some pullback on that is very positive. It's been disappointing that we've not been able to renegotiate the NPDO school finance. I know that we're not the only council in that position. There's other councils who have had similar issues in taking that forward, and that has resulted obviously in an overspend within that area, and that has to be mitigated from within the rest of the council. We are in the budget planning process for next year. All of this will feed into that process, and it'll be subject to deliberations and going forward. So I think it's a marker to where we are and the baseline for our budget going forward. I'm happy to move the recommendations. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I'll keep it as short because it's been well covered by both of you. I think, though, the pressures that's been on the reserves this year have been reported on a regular basis. Sorry. I came stuff out my right-hand side, sorry. As the report said, there's a 1.4, just over 1.4 million move on the reserve. So it's came down from about 10.5 million to just barely over 9 million. I think on the better side, and I think, again, to point it's been covered, but this time last year we were looking at a lot larger projected overspend with Cared for children. It was a major problem last year. That's roughly half of what it was last year. I think the new accommodation, the supported accommodation that's coming in, may have helped it. I know a lot's down to its demand for that side of the service, but I would hope that the new supported accommodation will obviously have a positive effect as we're going forward next year. Again, I do say people to remember that our reserves have dropped a bit, and the floor of our reserves is 7.5 million. I think that was agreed before I was here. As I get told off one day. So happy to second the report.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? Councillor Coombs, should have got your light in just before you, Councillor Alexander.
I just want to make a comment, as has been said. Money, money, money seems to be the key of this morning. I think that it is unfortunate that the NPDO schools, that the negotiations haven't come to fruition, but I also think that proposing a budget dependent upon negotiations with others where they're going to lose and we're going to win seems presumptuous, to say the least. I think that the negotiations should have been held first before we plugged that into the budget. To put it in there and say that that is going to save money when you're not in control of it seems, as I say, extremely optimistic, to say the least. And I just had a quick question for Brian on page 111. It's about mobile and flexible working, and I wondered, was this money allocated in 14? I just think mobile and flexible working seems to be a big cornerstone of what we're talking about in Council of the Future, and we've been pushing for it. And if there was money allocated in 14, how come it's still slushing around? I know in my personal budgets I don't have money from 14.
It's a fair point, and it does beg the question as to whether 14's right. I suspect that could be a typo. Can I double check that and get back to you with confirmation? If it's a wrong date, it's a wrong date, which would probably resolve the question. And if the date holds, an explanation as to why, given the elapsed time.
You can do that as long as I get a gold star for reading every page of your financial projections.
I take it everybody has.
Can I say, I read
you
that
want to do a show of hands?
Yeah. I read that differently. Brian, I read that as the mobile and flexible project was approved in 2014, but there has been various iterations of funding to support that project.
That's what I was asking, was the money allocated at that time? I don't know.
I think I would suggest the point's still valid, even though the trigger was 2014, that's
I think it needs
5 years
clarified.
elapsed time. So I think I'll undertake to get, along with colleagues, a clarification and get back to you.
Okay.
I think that maybe just the way it's been phrased has been wrong.
Well, that's why I wanted.
Absolutely. And can I just go back to the NPDO? At the time when we first started that NPDO, there was some very positive noises, my understanding, Brian, when we first started to look at renegotiating that. And subsequently, once we got into the detail, that's when it all kind of fell foul.
Yeah, I mean, without going into the ins and outs of it, and as I say, members will need to be more fully appraised of why we've ended up where we seem to have ended up. There's, I guess, two primary considerations. One is at the front end of the project, we were looking for senior debt who are effectively gatekeepers to approve the project. And they comprise a consortium of about 8 or 9 banks, and it's like herding cats. And at the end of the day,
councillors.
Indeed. At the end of the day, though, one particular bank was holding out and just been obstructive and vexatious. So that really slowed the process down. And then we went to market to seek indicative interest on the refinancing proposal. And what came back from the market was the requirement for effectively a change in the contract condition to protect the potential new investor coming in. That change in the contract then triggers a right of the existing sub-debt holders, who are the ones we're trying to refinance out, to be able to, they would have to agree to the change, and because it's not in their interest to do so, they then have the capacity to block the deal. So we've formally contacted them, and unsurprisingly, they've come back and said, no, we're sitting with a nice interest rate. We have no interest in being refinanced out. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place. And really, ultimately, it's a fault of the, with hindsight, a fault of the contract condition. But this contract is what, 2006? So, you know, as with all discussions around both this and the other schools contract, they're both creatures of their time. So you're trying to navigate a way through this. But when we'd gone out to market before, at a much earlier stage in the process, the parties expressing interest hadn't come back with this objection or this it was more than a request. It was really, there's no deal unless this clause gets changed. So at the earlier stages, there was nothing to indicate that the blockage that finally emerged would in fact be one. It was always going to be a difficult path, but it's only in the latter stages this has actually now been flushed out.
Okay. I think that, but the bottom line here, before I glaze over and everybody else does too, is that this should serve as a warning to us, because debt from then is impacting on next year's services, and that's the point I keep coming back to. Yeah. That what seems like a good idea and a good contract at the time isn't always.
But we just still had to find the savings
I know,
in that
but,
occasion.
but we said last year that we were going to make money on this deal, and we're not.
Well, schools.
It was done with the best of intentions at the time. Okay, Councillor
We
Alexander.
wouldn't have had 4 new secondary schools
I know,
and community access if we didn't have it.
PFI and the NPDO, I'm just saying in general, when we as a council...
Draw your attention to page 128.
I'm about to come on to the next item. The local government and Scotland financial overview. Can we assume that people have read this, Brian? I'm just very aware of time is now pressured, and if people have got questions, that's fine. In relation to it, it's just an item for noting. No questions. Okay. Councillor
I need a social life. I wasn't out at the weekend. What can I say?
You'll need to be quicker.
It was just a comment rather than a question, and again it ties into what we're talking about. If the Accounts Commission, the government's own Accounts Commission in point 411 can categorically state that the Scottish Government funding to local authorities from 13-14 to 18-19 has decreased by 7.6%, and funding to all other areas decreased by 0.4%, it makes me wonder why at any point this council has said in that chambers that this is a fair settlement. The Accounts Commission seems to say otherwise, and also in 4.1.2 the fact that there is less and less flexibility around what we as a local authority have the right to spend the diminishing funds on. Very, very finally, 4.4, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph out here, but the bottom line is it's absolutely clear from that that the initiative to have integrated joint boards, it's not just this authority that's having a problem with them. When the staff turnover at senior level is horrendous and the budgeting seems to be, I don't know how you describe horrendous, but the people that need the most from our social work are getting less and less of it.
I would have to fundamentally disagree with your last point there, in that if you actually look at the budgets, the social care aspect of our IGB has an overspend of 600,000, which is in the process of being mitigated, but that has not been as a reduction in service, and a service that has been continually under pressure and a continual increase. So I think the perception of people not getting service is wrong, and I think we have to be very careful about making these statements in a public forum.
Well, I think the process of integrating our social work with Health Board hasn't been particularly helpful for our social work departments, then. Is that a better way of saying it?
Integration has been challenging, and it requires all partners to be on the same page, and that's not always happened in every integrated joint board. And there's some people are on a journey and we're going at different paces. But fundamentally, we know that integration is actually good for our service users and actually provides a much better service. And there's some good examples of that happening locally and happening across Scotland. So I think we just have to be a bit mindful about the messages that we're sending out to the public. Well, well, it wasn't just our government that brought it in, but others had supported it. They supported the fundamental principle of integration of health and social care services going forward. But what you also have to put into context is the additionality of the savings. And what I'm taking from you is you don't believe that there should be further investment within education, health and social care, because you've indicated that these are not a priority. However, but the additionality has delivered on key policy, government policies going forward, and I don't think any of us could disagree with those. However, I'm going to move on. Councillor Alexander, you would like us first?
Yeah, just briefly a question for Brian. On page 128, the graph at the top, does that include the balance of the PFI Class 98 contract, our figure of traditional debt?
It's not entirely clear, to be perfectly honest. It's the explanation, and accepting this is a lift straight from the report, just talks about underlying borrowing and gross debt. The debt could, under one interpretation, include those deals, but conceivably might not. I guess part of an answer might be every council in Scotland will have undertaken those deals. So even if it did include it, there would be a degree of consistency across all councils, because that would be included in the base figure. But I think either way, the relativities would still hold good. And I think just on the back of that, it's interesting to see Falkirk's position. Normally, we're neatly positioned in the middle of this type of presentation, but in this case, we're very much at the extreme right-hand part of the chart, showing that our level of debt and borrowing is relatively low. And I guess that plays into the discussions that we've had at various points, including at the last council meeting, on the option of potentially using the expected margin availability of increasing council tax to lever up further investment. So I suppose if there was concerns as to us overstretching ourselves, this graph would provide some comfort that we certainly have headroom relative to other councils.
Thanks for that, Brian. In terms of the whether PFI is in there or not, the fact is it's still going to be an expensive programme for us. But the low level of overall debt is there and is manageable. And in fact, you almost are the criminal not to take advantage of low interest rates and low rates of traditional debt. But just say to Joan that PFI wasn't an inevitability, it was a choice.
Okay, Councillor Munro.
I grew up in Yorkshire, and there are more people in Yorkshire than there is in the whole of Scotland. But when they were offered a regional assembly, they said no. And the reason for it probably to do with this, because under 412 it says an increasing proportion of council budget is committed to national policy, determined by the centre, not by the people on the ground. And this is reducing the flexibility of councils for deciding how they plan and prioritise the use of funding to respond to local needs. And that's affecting us today. And it's made up of the ring fencing, the early years, the 18 to 26-year-olds, the pupil-teacher ratios. All of these things are being determined by the centre, which means there's less and less here for us to determine what it is our people need on the ground.
So
Can't
again,
you go Scotland with
well, that's just what I was going to say.
There are more people.
I think you need to be careful of comparing Scottish local authorities with English local authorities. If you actually look at where English local authorities are at this moment in time, Scottish local authorities have been significantly protected by the Scottish Government. Also, that the levels of ring fencing are far less now than they ever were under a Labour government in Edinburgh. But the message that you're saying is you don't agree with the government's priorities, and which you're entitled to do.
No,
but it's
I'm
very
not.
Well,
No.
in which case,
What I'm saying is that we have a majority of our spending over which we have no control as a local authority. And more of it is being determined by the centre.
But what you're saying, you would make different choices and you would not prioritise education, health and social care in doing that. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you. A small matter that there's countries all over the world which have got a smaller population than Yorkshire, Norway, to start with. How's their oil reserve doing? So if you want to go on those lines, quite happy to take that discussion. But I hear about the things that was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and I've got a little bit of concern that I would have thought that people would be happy to be spending work for social work and be spending work for childcare. I would have thought that was kind of the important things that we would actually want to be happening rather than actually complaining about them.
Okay, thank you. As this was only a report from Noting, I'm going to move item 10 is asset surplus to requirement. Again, I'll assume that people have read the report, and as there is no local members have been consulted and there's no objections, then can we take that as agreed?